When a dying child and his desperate mother collapsed on my porch, I had two choices: turn them away like everyone else had done, or let them destroy the walls I'd spent 5 years building around my heart. This is the story of Caleb Mercer, a man who'd buried his past so deep he forgot what it felt like to be human, until one scorching afternoon shattered everything. What happens when survival forces strangers into a bond stronger than blood? When a marriage of convenience becomes the realest thing you've ever known? And when the ghosts of your past won't let go without a fight? Stay with me until the very end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this tale travels. The Oklahoma Territory had a way of breaking people. Not quickly, like a storm or a bullet, but slowly, grinding them down day by day until there was nothing left but dust and regret. Caleb Mercer understood that better than most. He stood on the porch of his ranch house that July afternoon in 1889, a tin cup of lukewarm coffee in his scarred hands, surveying land that stretched so far it made a man feel insignificant. The prairie rolled on forever, brown and gold under a merciless sun, interrupted only by fence posts and the occasional mesquite tree twisted by wind into shapes that looked like they were trying to escape. 5 years he'd been out here. 5 years since he'd walked away from everything that mattered and built this ranch with his bare hands, sweat, and a determination to forget. The cattle operation ran itself mostly. He had 3 ranch hands who knew their business and didn't ask questions. That's how Caleb liked it. Quiet, predictable. Lonely as hell, but that was the point. He was 32 years old and felt 50. "Boss!" Tommy Breslin, the youngest of his hands, came jogging up from the south pasture, his face red from exertion and heat. The kid was 19, eager, and talked too much, but he worked hard enough that Caleb kept him on. "What?" "Thought you should know. There's someone coming up the road. On foot." Caleb frowned. The ranch was 8 miles from the nearest town, Copperhead Springs, and 12 miles from the next homestead. Nobody walked out here. Not unless something had gone very wrong.
How far out? Maybe half a mile? Moving real slow. Caleb set down his cup and stepped off the porch, shielding his eyes against the glare. At first he saw nothing but heat shimmer. Then, gradually, a dark shape emerged from the waves of distortion, a figure staggering along the rutted wagon road that led to his property. "Get back to work," he told Tommy. "I'll handle it." The kid hesitated. "You sure? Could be trouble." "Could be. Won't be the first time." Tommy nodded and headed back toward the barn, casting nervous glances over his shoulder. Caleb watched the approaching figure and felt something cold settle in his gut, an instinct honed by years of hard living that told him his quiet world was about to get complicated. He was right. 20 minutes later, the figure resolved into a woman. She wore a dress that might have been blue once, but was now faded to gray, torn at the hem and stained with God knew what. Her dark hair hung loose and tangled around her shoulders. She walked with the desperate, mechanical gait of someone running on nothing but will. And she was carrying a child. Caleb's jaw tightened. He stood at the edge of his porch, one hand resting on the post, and waited. When she got within 50 yards, he could see her face, gaunt, sunburned, lips cracked and bleeding. The child in her arms was small, maybe 3 or 4, wrapped in a threadbare blanket despite the heat. She saw him. Her steps faltered. For a moment he thought she might turn and run, but then her legs simply gave out. She went down hard on the packed dirt of his yard, her body curling protectively around the child as she fell. Caleb was moving before he realized it. He reached her in seconds, dropping to his knees beside her. Up close, she looked worse. Dehydrated, half-starved, barely conscious. The child was burning with fever, his small face flushed and damp, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Ma'am," Caleb's voice came out rougher than he intended. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open. They were dark brown, almost black, and filled with a desperation that hit him like a physical blow. "Please," she whispered. Her voice was wrecked, barely audible. "Please, my son." The boy whimpered, a pitiful sound that twisted something deep in Caleb's chest, something he'd thought was dead. "Tommy!" he shouted toward the barn. "Get in here, now!" He slid his arms under the woman, lifting her with an ease that spoke to how little she weighed. She couldn't have been more than 100 pounds.
The child stayed clutched against her chest, and Caleb carried them both up the porch steps and into the house. Inside was cooler, shaded, sparse. Caleb had never bothered much with furniture beyond the basics: a table, chairs, a sofa that came with the house, his bed upstairs. He laid the woman on the sofa as gently as he could. She didn't let go of the boy. Tommy burst through the door, his eyes going wide. Sweet Jesus. Get water, Caleb snapped, and find the medicine kit. There's laudanum in there and fever powder. Right, okay. Tommy disappeared into the kitchen. Caleb knelt beside the sofa again. The woman's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. The boy was worse. His fever was dangerously high, his lips dry and cracked, small body trembling. Ma'am, I need to check your son. Can you let go? Her arms tightened reflexively, but then, slowly, she loosened her grip. Caleb eased the child away from her and carried him to the table, unwrapping the filthy blanket. The boy was tiny, fragile, wearing clothes that hung off his small frame. His skin was hot enough to scorch. Pneumonia, maybe. Or something worse. Tommy returned with a bucket of water and the battered wooden box that served as their medical supplies. Caleb worked quickly, soaking a cloth and pressing it to the boy's forehead, forcing water between his cracked lips a drop at a time. The kid coughed, sputtered, but swallowed. What do we do? Tommy asked, hovering uselessly. Make yourself useful. Get some broth started. Chicken, if we have it. Thin. We got beef. Chicken's easier on the stomach. Check the cold box. While Tommy rummaged in the kitchen, Caleb mixed fever powder into a cup of water and carefully tipped it into the boy's mouth. Most of it dribbled down his chin, but some went down. It would have to be enough. Behind him, the woman stirred. My son. Her voice was stronger now, edged with panic. She tried to sit up and immediately swayed, her face going white. Easy. Caleb was beside her in 2 strides, his hand on her shoulder, steadying her. He's right here. I'm trying to bring his fever down. She looked past him to where the boy lay on the table, and something in her expression cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks, cutting tracks through the dust and grime. He's dying, she said flatly. Isn't he? Not if I can help it. She stared at him, and he saw the moment she decided to believe him, or maybe just decided she had no other choice. What's his name? Caleb asked. Eli. His name is Eli. All right, Eli. Caleb returned to the table, adjusting the cool cloth on the boy's forehead. You're going to fight this, understand me? You're going to fight. Over the next 3 hours, Caleb did everything he knew how to do. He kept water and fever powder going into Eli in careful doses. He sponged the boy down with cool water to bring down the temperature. He propped him up when the breathing got too labored, clearing his small airway. Tommy brought broth, and Caleb managed to get a few spoonfuls into the child. The woman, she still hadn't told him her name, drifted in and out of consciousness on the sofa. When she was awake, her eyes never left her son. When she slept, it was the sleep of complete exhaustion, her body finally giving up the fight to stay vigilant. By evening, Eli's fever broke. It happened gradually, the flush fading from his cheeks, his breathing evening out, his small body relaxing into something closer to normal sleep than delirium. Caleb sat beside him, one hand resting lightly on the boy's chest to monitor his breathing, and felt the tension in his own shoulders start to ease. Is he? The woman's voice came from behind him. Caleb turned. She'd managed to sit up, though she looked like hell, pale, trembling, her eyes hollowed out by exhaustion and fear. Fever's broken. He's not out of danger yet, but he's breathing easier. She closed her eyes, and for a moment Caleb thought she might collapse again. Instead, she took a shaking breath and opened them. Thank you, she said quietly. I can't. You can thank me later. Right now you need water, food, and rest, in that order. He brought her water first, a full cup, which she drank so fast she choked. He made her slow down on the second cup. Tommy had managed to produce not just broth, but actual stew, thick with vegetables and meat, and Caleb ladled out a bowl for her. She ate like she hadn't seen food in days, which he suspected she hadn't. Slow down, he said again. You'll make yourself sick. She ignored him, scraping the bowl clean and looking at it like she wanted to lick it. Caleb refilled it without comment. This time she ate slower, her hands shaking so badly the spoon rattled against the ceramic. When she finished, she set the bowl aside and looked at him properly for the first time. My name is Nora, she said. Nora Whitaker. Caleb Mercer. This is my ranch.
I know,
I was told. In town. They said you lived out here alone, that you didn't. She stopped, swallowing hard. They said you didn't like strangers.
they're not wrong.
Then why did you help us?
Caleb looked at the small boy sleeping on his table, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, and felt something twist in his gut that he'd spent 5 years trying to kill. Because I'm not a monster, he said quietly.
Nora studied him with those dark, exhausted eyes, and he had the uncomfortable feeling she was seeing more than he wanted to show. What happened to you? Caleb asked, changing the subject. How did you end up out here on foot with a sick kid? Her face shuddered immediately, walls slamming down. That's a long story. I've got time. I don't owe you my life story just because you gave me a meal.
No, Caleb agreed. But if you're staying under my roof, I need to know what kind of trouble might follow you here. She flinched at that, and he knew he'd hit the mark. There was trouble. Of course there was. I'm not asking you to leave, he added, softer. The boy needs rest, and so do you, but I don't like surprises. Nora was quiet for a long moment, her hands twisting in the fabric of her ruined dress. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, drained of emotion.
My husband died 8 months ago. Accident at the lumber mill where he worked. We were living in Kansas City. We had a little house, not much, but it was ours. After Samuel died, she paused, her throat working. His employer said there was no compensation. We had some savings, but it ran out. I tried to find work, but nobody wants to hire a woman with a young child. I couldn't pay rent. We got evicted. Caleb listened in silence, his expression giving nothing away.
I heard there were opportunities out west, Nora continued. Homesteading, domestic work, something. So I used the last of our money for train fare to Oklahoma Territory. When we got to Copperhead Springs, I went door to door looking for any kind of work. Cleaning, cooking, laundry, anything.
And? Her laugh was bitter. Turns out a widow with no references and a small child isn't very appealing. Everyone had reasons. I was too thin, too desperate. Eli would be a distraction. They didn't have room. They didn't have money. They didn't trust me. One woman accused me of trying to seduce her husband just because I asked if they needed help with housework. Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew the type. Small-town people with small minds, terrified of anything that didn't fit their narrow view of proper. We stayed at the boarding house for 3 days, Nora said. That was all I could afford. After that, we slept wherever we could. An abandoned barn, under a wagon. Eli started coughing on the second night. By the 4th day, he was burning up, and I knew he wouldn't survive without help. I went to the doctor in town, but he wanted payment up front. I didn't have anything. Her voice cracked on the last word. She pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting for control.
Someone told me about you, she said after a moment.
Said you had a ranch out here, that you employed men, that maybe you'd have work. I knew it was a long walk, but I didn't have anywhere else to go. So I started walking. I thought if I could just get here, maybe you'd at least give Eli water or let us rest in your barn, something. She looked at him then, and the raw desperation in her eyes made something in Caleb's chest constrict. I wasn't going to beg, she said quietly. I promised myself I wouldn't beg anymore, but if you turned us away, I would have. For Eli, I would have gotten on my knees and begged. Caleb stood abruptly, crossing to the window. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of orange and gold. He could see Tommy and the other hands finishing up evening chores, their silhouettes moving against the dying light.
You can stay, he said, not looking at her. Both of you. Until the boy's well enough to travel, at least.
I can work, Nora said immediately. I can cook, clean, mend clothes. We'll figure that out later. Right now, you need to rest. I don't need charity. He turned to face her, and something in his expression made her fall silent. It's not charity, he said, and it's not kindness. I'm not a good man, Mrs. Whitaker. I'm just a man who's done things he's not proud of, and maybe this balances the scale a little, that's all. Before she could respond, Eli stirred on the table, making a small, frightened sound. Nora was on her feet instantly, despite her exhaustion, crossing to her son and gathering him into her arms. Mama? The boy's voice was thin, confused. I'm here, baby. Mama's here. Where are we?
Somewhere safe. Go back to sleep. Eli's eyes drifted closed again, his small body relaxing against his mother.
Nora stood there, holding him, swaying slightly on her feet, and Caleb realized she was about to collapse again. "Upstairs," he said. "There's a bedroom. It's not fancy, but it's got a real bed. You can both sleep there." "Where will you sleep?" "I've got the sofa. Won't be the first time." Nora looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. Caleb led her up the narrow stairs to the second floor, where 2 bedrooms sat empty and dusty. He'd been sleeping in the larger one, but the smaller room had a bed with a decent mattress and clean sheets he'd washed but never used. "I'll bring up water," he said, "and some clothes that might fit you better than that dress. They'll be too big, but they're clean." "Mr. Mercer." "Caleb," she hesitated. "Caleb, I meant what I said. I can work. I won't be dead weight." "Didn't figure you would be. Now get some rest before you fall down." He left her there, closing the door behind him, and stood in the hallway for a moment, trying to figure out what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. Downstairs, Tommy was lingering awkwardly in the kitchen. "So," the kid said, "we keeping them?" "Don't say it like that. She's not a stray dog." "I didn't mean, I just meant, are they staying? Because people in town are going to talk." "Let them talk." Tommy shifted his weight. "Boss, I know it's not my business, but you don't know anything about her. What if she's trouble?" Caleb thought about the woman upstairs, so thin he could probably count her ribs, holding her sick child like he was the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. "She's not trouble," he said. "She's desperate. There's a difference." "If you say so." After Tommy left, Caleb stood in his empty house and wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd built this place to be alone, to escape the memories that haunted him, to exist in a space where the past couldn't touch him, and now he'd invited strangers into it. He climbed the stairs quietly and paused outside the bedroom door. Through the thin wood, he could hear Nora's voice, soft and low, singing something to her son. The melody was sweet and sad, and it stirred memories Caleb had buried so deep he'd thought they were gone. He forced himself to walk away, to go back downstairs and find a blanket for the sofa. But as he lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't stop thinking about the boy's fevered face, or the desperation in Nora's eyes, or the way she'd looked at him like he was some kind of savior. He wasn't. He was just a man trying to outrun his ghosts, and he had the sinking feeling that by letting Nora and Eli into his home, he'd just invited those ghosts to catch up. The next morning, Caleb woke before dawn out of habit and found Tommy already in the kitchen making coffee. "She up yet?" the kid asked. "Don't know, haven't checked." They drank their coffee in silence, the way Caleb preferred, and he was heading out to start morning chores when he heard footsteps on the stairs. He turned to find Nora descending, wearing the shirt and pants he'd left outside her door. They hung off her frame like she was a child playing dress-up, but she'd rolled up the sleeves and cuffs and belted the pants with a piece of rope. She looked better than yesterday, still too thin, still exhausted, but her eyes were clear and she moved with more purpose. "Eli?" Caleb asked. "Still sleeping. His fever's gone, but he's weak." "That's normal. He'll need a few days to get his strength back." Nora nodded, her gaze sweeping over the kitchen. "I can make breakfast, if you show me where things are." "You don't have to." "I told you I'd work. I meant it." Caleb exchanged a glance with Tommy, who shrugged. "All right. Pantry's there, cold box is on the porch. We usually just do eggs and whatever meat's left from the night before." Nora set to work with an efficiency that spoke of years of practice. Within 20 minutes, she had eggs scrambled, bacon fried, and biscuits baking in the old cast-iron stove. The smell alone made Caleb's stomach growl. When she set plates in front of them, Tommy dug in with enthusiasm. "Ma'am," he said around a mouthful of eggs, "this is the best breakfast I've had since my mama died." Nora's expression softened. "Thank you." Caleb ate in silence, but he had to admit the food was good, better than anything he or the hands had managed. When he finished, he stood and carried his plate to the wash basin. "I've got work," he said. "If you need anything, Tommy can help you." "Actually," Nora said, "I was hoping to talk to you about what I can do around here. You said we could figure it out later. Well, it's later." Caleb paused. "You sure you're up for it?" "I'm up for it." He studied her for a moment, this woman who'd walked 8 miles carrying a dying child, who'd been rejected and humiliated by an entire town, who'd collapsed on his porch and still woke up the next morning ready to work. "All right," he said. "House could use cleaning,
Place is a mess. Cooking, if you're willing. The hands eat with me most nights, and we're all getting tired of burnt stew. Laundry, mending, anything else you see that needs doing. What about Eli? He can stay in the house while he recovers. After that, Caleb shrugged. We'll figure it out. How much are you paying me?
The directness of this question caught him off guard. Most women he knew would have danced around the subject, but Nora met his eyes with the calm determination of someone who'd learned the hard way that survival required bluntness. Room and board for both of you, Caleb said, plus $10 a month. 15. 12. Done. They shook on it, her hand small and rough in his, and Caleb had the distinct feeling he'd just been outmaneuvered. Over the next week, Nora transformed the ranch house. She scrubbed floors that hadn't been properly cleaned in years. She washed windows until they actually let in light. She organized the chaos of the pantry, mended curtains Caleb didn't even know were torn, and somehow made the place feel less like a way station and more like a home. Eli recovered slowly but steadily. By the third day, he was sitting up and eating solid food. By the fifth, he was walking around the house, exploring with the careful curiosity of a child who'd learned not to expect good things. By the seventh, he ventured outside. Caleb was working with one of the horses in the corral when he heard small footsteps behind him. He turned to find Eli standing at the fence, his small hands gripping the wooden rails, his eyes wide as he watched the big chestnut mare Caleb was training. "You should be inside," Caleb said. "Mama said I could come out if I didn't bother you." "You're bothering me." Eli's face fell and he started to turn away. Caleb sighed. "Hold on. You want to see the horse?" The boy's face lit up like sunrise. "Really?" "Come here slowly, don't spook her." Eli climbed through the fence rails with the agility of a monkey and approached cautiously. The mare, a temperamental 3-year-old Caleb had been working with for weeks, flicked her ears forward and watched the child with interest. "This is Copper," Caleb said. "She's mean as a snake and twice as unpredictable, but she's smart. You understand?" Eli nodded solemnly. "Give me your hand." The boy extended his small hand without hesitation, trusting in a way that made Caleb's chest tighten. He guided Eli's palm to the mare's neck, showing him how to stroke with the grain of the coat. "She's so soft," Eli whispered. "Horses are like people," Caleb said. "They remember kindness, and they remember cruelty. You treat them right, they'll carry you through hell. You treat them wrong, they'll throw you off a cliff." "Which kind are you?" The question, so innocent and direct, caught Caleb completely off guard. He looked down at the boy, this small, fragile kid who'd almost died a week ago, who was standing in his corral petting his horse like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'm the kind that keeps his distance," Caleb said finally. "Why?" "Because it's safer." "For who?" "For everyone." Eli considered this with the seriousness of someone far older than his years. "Mama says sometimes safe is just another word for lonely." Before Caleb could respond to that piece of uncomfortable wisdom, Nora's voice rang out from the porch. "Eli, time to come in." "Okay, Mama." The boy gave Copper one last pat and scrambled back through the fence rails. He paused at the edge of the corral and looked back at Caleb. "Thank you for showing me." "Sure, kid." Eli ran toward the house, and Caleb watched him go, feeling something shift in his chest, a crack in the armor he'd spent 5 years building. That night, after the hands had eaten and left, after Eli had gone to bed, Caleb found himself sitting on the porch with Nora. It wasn't planned. She'd just come outside to get some air, and he'd been there watching the stars, and neither of them had moved to go inside. They sat in silence for a while. Caleb had learned that Nora didn't feel the need to fill every silence with chatter, which he appreciated. She just sat, her hands folded in her lap, her face tilted up to catch the evening breeze. "He's getting attached to you," she said finally. "The kid? He's just curious. He asks about you, what you're doing, where you go, why you don't talk much." "What do you tell him?" "That some people are quieter than others. That it doesn't mean they're mean, just that they have their own way of being." Caleb glanced at her. "Is that what you think? That I'm not mean?" "I think you're someone who's been hurt and decided not to risk it again." She said it matter-of-factly, without pity or judgment. "I understand that. I've thought about it myself." "But you didn't." I have Eli. I don't get the luxury of shutting down. He needs me to keep going, so I keep going." They fell silent again. In the distance, a coyote howled, and the sound carried across the prairie like a ghost. "Can I ask you something?" Nora said. "You can ask. Doesn't mean I'll answer. What happened to make you come out here alone?" Caleb's jaw tightened. He should have expected the question. Hell, he'd asked her about her past, but having it turned around on him felt like being stripped naked. "Long story," he said, echoing her words from that first night. "I've got time," she said, echoing his. Despite himself, Caleb felt his mouth twitch. Almost a smile. Almost. "I had a family once," he said, the words coming out rough and unwilling. "Wife, daughter. We had a place up in Missouri, a little farm. Nothing fancy, but it was ours." He stopped, the memories crashing over him like a wave. Nora didn't push, just waited. "There was a fever," he continued, "swept through one winter. Sarah, my wife, she got sick first. Then Emma, our daughter. She was 3 years old." His voice cracked on the last word, and he forced himself to keep going. "I tried everything. Doctor said there was nothing to be done except wait and pray, so I waited, and I prayed. And they died anyway. Both of them, within a week of each other." "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. "After that, I couldn't stay. Everywhere I looked, I saw them. So I sold the farm, took what money I had, and came out here. Built this place. Figured if I kept moving, kept working, eventually it wouldn't hurt so much." "Does it? Hurt less?" "No," Caleb said honestly. "But at least out here there's nobody around to see it." Nora was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Emma, that's a beautiful name." She was a beautiful kid. Looked just like her mother. Same red hair, same laugh that sounded like bells. He paused, his throat tight. "Eli reminds me of her sometimes. The way he looks at things like they're miracles. The way he trusts even when he shouldn't. Maybe that's not a bad thing. It's dangerous. Trust gets you hurt. Maybe, but the alternative is spending your whole life afraid to feel anything." Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her. In the moonlight, she was all sharp angles and shadows, too thin and worn down by life. But there was a strength in her that he recognized, a refusal to break even when breaking would be easier. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "Someone weaker, someone who'd fall apart." "I did fall apart," Nora said. "Literally collapsed on your porch, if you remember. But I got back up. That's all anyone can do, isn't it? Fall down and get back up." Before Caleb could respond, a sound from inside made them both turn. Eli was crying, not the full-throated wail of a child in pain, but the frightened whimper of a nightmare. Nora was on her feet instantly, heading inside. Caleb stayed on the porch, listening to her footsteps on the stairs, her soft voice soothing the boy. After a few minutes, the crying stopped. She didn't come back outside. Caleb sat alone in the darkness and wondered what the hell he was doing. He'd opened his home to strangers. He'd told a woman he barely knew about the family he'd lost. He'd let a little boy into his corral and felt something other than numbness for the first time in 5 years. It was terrifying. It was also, he realized with a jolt that felt like lightning, the first time in a very long time that he'd felt even remotely alive. 3 weeks turned into a month, and the rhythm of the ranch settled into something Caleb hadn't experienced in years. Routine that didn't feel like imprisonment. Nora worked harder than any 2 men he'd ever hired. She was up before dawn, getting the stove fired and coffee brewing before the hands stumbled in for breakfast. She kept the house cleaner than it had any right to be, turned worn-out clothes into something serviceable again, and somehow made salt pork and beans taste like they were worth eating. The hands stopped complaining about the food. Hell, they stopped complaining about much of anything. But it was more than the work. The house felt different, alive in ways Caleb had forgotten were possible. Eli was part of that. The boy had recovered his strength, and with it came an energy that seemed boundless. He was everywhere, following Tommy around asking endless questions, sitting on the corral fence watching Caleb work horses, helping his mother in ways that were probably more hindrance than help, but she never said so. "Mr. Caleb?" The boy appeared at his elbow one afternoon while Caleb was mending fence in the south pasture. "What are you doing?" Caleb didn't look up from the post he was setting. "Fixing what's broken." "Why's it broken?" Cattle leaned on it, pushed it over. Why'd they do that? Because they're stupid, and the grass looks greener on the other side. Is it? Greener? No, but they don't know that. Eli considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. Mama says sometimes people want things just because they can't have them, even if those things aren't actually better. Caleb glanced at the boy. Your mama's a smart woman. She cries sometimes, at night, when she thinks I'm sleeping. The words hit Caleb in the chest like a fist. He set down his tools and looked at Eli properly. The kid's face was serious, worried in a way no 4-year-old should have to be. Your mama's been through a lot, Caleb said carefully. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're sad or scared or just tired. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. Are you ever sad? Sometimes. Do you cry? Not anymore. Why not? Caleb picked up the post again, driving it into the ground with more force than necessary. Because I used up all my tears a long time ago. Eli watched him work for a few minutes in silence. Then he said, I like it here. Yeah? Yeah, it's quiet, but it's a good quiet. Not a scary quiet. Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he just kept working. But when the boy wandered off a few minutes later, chasing a grasshopper through the tall grass, Caleb found himself watching and feeling that dangerous crack in his armor widen a little more. That evening, after supper, Caleb was going through the ranch accounts at the kitchen table when Nora came down from putting Eli to bed. She moved to the wash basin and started on the dishes from dinner. Leave them, Caleb said. You've done enough today. I don't mind. I'm telling you to leave them. She turned to face him, her hands dripping soapy water. You don't have to bark at me. I'm not one of your ranch hands. I wasn't barking. You were absolutely barking. They stared at each other for a moment, and then, unexpectedly, Caleb felt his mouth twitch. Fine, I was barking, but my point stands. You work too hard. So do you. It's my ranch, and I live here too. For now, anyway. The for now hung in the air between them. Caleb set down his pencil. You thinking about leaving? Nora dried her hands on a towel, not meeting his eyes. I can't stay here forever. Why not? Because this isn't my home. It's yours. You took us in when we needed help, and I'm grateful, but I can't just... She trailed off, struggling for words. I can't be a burden indefinitely. Who said you're a burden? I know how this looks. A widow living under a single man's roof. People will talk. They probably already are. Let them talk. It's not that simple. Eli's getting attached to this place, to you. The longer we stay, the harder it'll be when we have to go. Caleb stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. And where exactly would you go? I don't know yet. Maybe back to Kansas City. Maybe somewhere else. I'll find work eventually. Doing what? You tried that already, remember? Nobody would hire you. Her face flushed. That was before. I'm stronger now. I know what to expect. You know what to expect? Caleb's voice rose despite himself. You expect to get rejected and humiliated again? To go hungry again? To watch your son get sick because you can't afford a roof over his head? That's not fair. No, what's not fair is you deciding to leave when you've got a good situation here just because you're worried about what people might say. This isn't about what people say. This is about... She stopped abruptly, pressing her lips together. About what? Nothing. Forget it. Nora. She turned away, gripping the edge of the wash basin. This is about me not wanting to owe you my life. Do you understand that? Every day I stay here, every meal you provide, every night we sleep under your roof, I owe you more. And I can't pay you back. Not really. $12 a month doesn't cover what you've done for us. Caleb crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and grabbed her shoulder, turning her to face him. I don't want your money and I don't want your gratitude. I want you and Eli safe. Is that so hard to understand? She looked up at him, and he saw her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Why? Why do you care what happens to us? The question stopped him cold. He dropped his hand and stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. I don't know, he said finally. But I do. They stood there in the dim kitchen, the silence stretching between them like a rope pulled too tight. Finally, Nora wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and turned back to the dishes. I'll stay, she said quietly. For now. But if this becomes a problem, if people start making things difficult for you because of us, I'm gone. Understood? Understood. She didn't turn around again, just kept washing dishes with methodical precision. Caleb returned to his accounts, but the numbers blurred in front of his eyes. He couldn't concentrate. Couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd looked at him, the crack in her voice when she'd asked why he cared. He didn't have a good answer. He just knew that the thought of them leaving made something in his chest constrict painfully. A week later, the problem Nora had predicted arrived in town. Caleb had ridden into Copperhead Springs for supplies, taking Tommy with him to help load the wagon. It was Saturday, which meant the town was busier than usual. Farmers and ranchers coming in to trade, families doing their weekly shopping, the saloon doing brisk business even at midday. They were loading bags of grain when Caleb heard his name. Mercer! He turned to find Marcus Howell, who owned the general store, standing on the boardwalk with his arms crossed. Behind him were three other men Caleb recognized, all prominent citizens, all with the self-righteous expressions of people who thought their opinions mattered. Howell, Caleb said neutrally, we need to talk. I'm busy. This can't wait. Caleb exchanged a glance with Tommy, who looked nervous. Fine, talk. Howell stepped down from the boardwalk, the other men following. It's come to our attention that you've got a woman living out at your ranch. That's right, without benefit of marriage. Also right. You don't see a problem with that? Caleb straightened to his full height, which was considerable. Howell was a small man who liked to puff himself up with authority he didn't actually have. No, I don't. Well, we do. It's not decent, Mercer. You've got an unmarried woman and a child living under your roof. It's improper. She works for me. She cooks, cleans, and earns her keep. Same as any ranch hand. It's not the same, and you know it. This came from Preston Walls, who ran the bank. There are standards of behavior in a civilized community. Civilized, Caleb repeated. That's interesting coming from you. As I recall, Mrs. Whitaker came to this civilized community looking for work and got turned away by every single one of you. Where was your civilization then? Howell's face reddened. That's different. We don't know anything about her. She could be anyone. She's a widow with a child who needed help. I helped her. End of story. It's not the end, Walls insisted. People are talking. They're saying she's your mistress, that you're living in sin. Caleb's jaw tightened dangerously. People need to mind their own business. It becomes our business when it affects the moral character of the town. The moral character of the town, Caleb said slowly, wasn't so concerned when that woman and her son were sleeping in a barn. But now that she's got a roof and food, suddenly everyone's worried about morality? Don't twist this around, Howell snapped. We're trying to protect her reputation. No, you're trying to control what I do on my own property, and you can all go to hell. He turned back to the wagon, signaling Tommy to finish loading. But Walls stepped forward, his voice dropping to a more conciliatory tone. Mercer, be reasonable. We're not trying to make trouble. We're just saying that if you care about this woman's reputation and the boy's future, you need to think about how this looks. I don't care how it looks. You should. Because if this continues, there will be consequences. The church won't want her. Decent families won't associate with her. And when that boy gets older, he'll carry the stain of his mother's choices. Caleb spun around so fast that Walls stumbled backward. You threatening her? I'm stating facts. The community has standards. Then the community can shove its standards up its... Boss? Tommy's hand on his arm stopped him. The kid's face was pale. Don't. It's not worth it. Caleb wanted to hit something, preferably Walls' smug face. But Tommy was right. Getting into a fight in the middle of town would only make things worse. We're done here, he said through gritted teeth. Think about what we said, Howell called after him. For her sake. The ride back to the ranch was silent. Tommy knew better than to try conversation when Caleb was in this mood. By the time they pulled up to the house, Caleb's anger had settled into a cold, hard resolve. He found Nora in the kitchen preparing dinner. She took one look at his face and set down her knife. What happened? Nothing. Caleb. He slammed his hat down on the table harder than necessary. Some concerned citizens in town decided to share their thoughts about you living here. Her face went white. What did they say? It doesn't matter what they said. It matters to me, he told her, leaving out the worst of it, but giving her enough to understand. With each word, he watched her face close off, walls slamming down the same way they had that first night. "I see," she said when he finished. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't shut down. Don't start planning to leave. Don't give them what they want." "What I want," Nora said quietly, "is not to be the subject of gossip, not to be called your mistress, not to have people look at Eli and think less of him because of choices I made to keep him alive." "Then we'll make them stop talking." "How?" Caleb didn't have an answer for that. He paced the kitchen, his mind racing. There had to be a way to shut down the gossip, to protect Nora and Eli from the small-minded judgment of people who wouldn't lift a finger to help them but were happy to tear them down. An idea formed. It was reckless and probably stupid, but once it took root, he couldn't shake it. "We could get married," he said. Nora went very still. "What?" "You heard me. If we get married, they can't say anything. You'd be Mrs. Mercer, respectable, protected." "That's insane." "Is it? You need protection and a home. I need—" He trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. "You need what, Caleb? A housekeeper you don't have to pay? Someone to warm your bed?" "Don't." His voice came out sharp. "Don't cheapen it like that." "Then tell me what you need from this arrangement, because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're offering charity dressed up as matrimony." "It's not charity, it's practical." "Marriage should be more than practical." "Should it? Your last marriage was practical, wasn't it? You said you married your husband because he could provide for you. How is this different?" The words came out harsher than he intended, and he saw her flinch. He tried to take them back, but she was already moving, heading for the stairs. "Nora, wait. I need to check on Eli." She disappeared upstairs, and Caleb was left alone in the kitchen, feeling like he'd just made everything worse. That night, he slept on the porch. Not because he'd been kicked out of his own house, but because he needed air and space and the stars overhead to remind him that his problems were small compared to the vastness of the universe. He was still there at dawn when the door opened and Nora stepped out. She had 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She gave him one and sat down on the steps beside him. They drank in silence for a while. Then Nora said, "You're right." "About what?" "My marriage to Samuel. It was practical. I was 18, alone, working in a factory for pennies. He was kind and stable and offered me a better life. I didn't love him when we married. I learned to love him over time, but at the start, it was survival." "I shouldn't have said that." "No, you should have, because you're right that this wouldn't be different, except—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Except, I already know you. I know you're not cruel. I know you're not a drunk or a gambler. I know you care about Eli, even if you don't want to admit it. And I know that if we did this, it would be honest. We both know what it is and what it isn't." Caleb looked at her. "What would it be?" "A partnership. A way to protect each other from a world that doesn't have much use for people like us." "And what it wouldn't be?" She met his eyes. "Love, romance, whatever it is people dream about when they think of marriage. We'd have to be clear about that. No expectations of something more." "I can live with that," Caleb said. And he meant it, or at least he thought he did. "Then yes," Nora said. "If you're serious about this, my answer is yes." They were married 3 days later by a circuit judge who happened to be passing through. It was the most unromantic wedding imaginable. No flowers, no celebration, just paperwork signed in the judge's dusty office, while Tommy and one of the other ranch hands served as witnesses. Nora wore the same mended dress she'd arrived in, cleaned and pressed. Caleb wore his only good shirt. The judge pronounced them man and wife. Caleb signed a check for the filing fee, and they walked out married. "Well," Nora said as they climbed into the wagon, "that's done." "Yeah." "Feel any different?" "No. You?" "Not really." But that was a lie, and they both knew it. Something had shifted. They were bound now, legally and publicly, for better or worse. The ranch hands threw together a celebration that night despite Caleb's protests, music from a battered fiddle, whiskey that burned going down, food that Nora had somehow made special despite their sparse supplies. Eli was thrilled, dancing around the yard with an energy that made everyone smile. "You got yourself a family now, boss," Tommy said, clapping Caleb on the shoulder. "How's it feel?" "Ask me in a year," Caleb said. But when he looked across the yard and saw Nora laughing at something one of the hands said, When he saw Eli trying to copy the men's dance moves with enthusiastic clumsiness, he felt something unfamiliar bloom in his chest. Not quite happiness, but maybe the possibility of it. Later, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Caleb stood in the hallway outside what had been his bedroom. Nora was inside with Eli. They'd decided the boy should stay with her for now, for stability. "You can come in," her voice called softly. "I'm decent." He pushed open the door. She was sitting on the edge of the bed in a nightgown someone had given her, brushing out her hair. Eli was already asleep, curled up on the far side of the bed. "I'll take the other room," Caleb said. "All right. This doesn't have to be, we agreed." "I know what we agreed." She set down the brush. "We're not in any hurry. This is new for both of us." He nodded, relieved and maybe, though he'd never admit it, a little disappointed. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "Thank you. For today. For all of this." "Don't thank me yet. You might regret it." "I doubt that." He left her there and went to the other bedroom, but sleep didn't come easy. He lay awake listening to the sounds of the house, the creak of old wood, the whisper of wind through gaps in the walls, the soft breathing of the woman and child down the hall, his wife and stepson, technically. Though those words felt strange in his mind. The next morning brought the first test of their new arrangement. Caleb was repairing the barn door when a wagon rolled up carrying 3 women from town. He recognized them immediately: the pastor's wife, the school teacher, and Mrs. Howell from the general store. They'd come to inspect his new wife, and he felt his hackles rise immediately. Nora came out to greet them, wiping flour from her hands. She'd been baking bread, and the smell wafted from the open kitchen window. "Mrs. Mercer," the pastor's wife said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We heard the news and wanted to welcome you properly." "That's kind of you," Nora said carefully. "May we come in?" Caleb wanted to say no, to send them packing, but Nora nodded and led them inside. He followed at a distance, stationing himself just outside the kitchen window where he could hear but not be seen. "What a cozy home," Mrs. Howell said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "It suits our needs," Nora replied. "I'm sure. Though it must be quite an adjustment going from city life to this. Every life requires adjustment." The school teacher, Miss Perry, Caleb remembered, spoke up. "We wanted to make sure you know about the church services. They're every Sunday morning. We'd love to see you and your son there. We'll keep that in mind." "And there's a ladies' auxiliary that meets Wednesday afternoons," the pastor's wife added. "We do charitable work, quilting, that sort of thing. You'd be welcome." Would she, though? Caleb doubted it. This felt less like a welcome and more like an interrogation. "How did you and Mr. Mercer meet?" Mrs. Howell asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I came looking for work. He hired me. And then you married him. How fortunate." "Yes," Nora said evenly. "I am fortunate. It all happened rather quickly, didn't it?" "When you know, you know." Caleb had to suppress a smile at that. Nora was handling them better than he would have. "And your son," Miss Perry said. "He'll need schooling soon. I run the schoolhouse. We'd be happy to have him." "Thank you. When he's old enough, we'll consider it." The conversation continued in that vein, polite on the surface, poisonous underneath. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, the women finally left. Caleb waited until their wagon was out of sight before going inside. Nora was standing at the sink, gripping the edge so hard her knuckles were white. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm fine." They're vultures. They're just curious. They're here to judge whether you're good enough for their precious community. And the answer is no, you're not, because nobody could be. Their standards are impossible. She turned to face him. "Does it bother you? What they think?" "Not even a little." "It bothers me," she'd admitted, "not because I care what they think of me, but because I care what they think of Eli. He deserves better than to be whispered about." "Then we'll make sure he gets better. We'll make sure nobody dares say a word against him." "How?" "By being exactly who we are and not apologizing for it." She smiled then, a real smile, and something in Caleb's chest loosened. Over the following weeks, they settled into their new reality. Caleb went about his work with the same dedication as always. Nora continued to run the household with efficiency that bordered on miraculous. Eli grew browner and stronger, spending his days exploring the ranch and asking questions that suggested a mind far sharper than his 4 years should allow. And slowly, carefully, Caleb and Nora learned to be married. It wasn't romantic. They didn't share a bed or exchange tender words, but they learned each other's rhythms and habits. He discovered she hummed while she worked, always the same melody he'd heard that first night. She learned he was grouchiest in the mornings and needed coffee before conversation. He found out she was terrible at poker but brilliant at chess. She realized he knew every star in the sky and could predict weather 3 days out just by watching the horizon. They became partners in the truest sense, two people working toward the same goal, even if neither of them was quite sure what that goal was anymore. One evening, about 6 weeks after the wedding, Caleb came in from a long day to find Nora in the kitchen with tears streaming down her face. His first thought was panic. Someone had hurt her. Something was wrong with Eli. "What happened?" he demanded. She held up an envelope. "Letter from Kansas City. My landlord, my old landlord. He found a box of my things I'd left behind, Samuel's things. He's sending them." "That's good, isn't it?" "I don't know." She wiped her eyes. "I thought I'd lost everything, every piece of our life together. And now—" Caleb understood then. It wasn't just sadness. It was grief reopened, memories flooding back. "You loved him," he said quietly. "I did. By the end, I really did. He was a good man." "I know." She looked at him with those dark eyes. "Does it bother you that I still—" "No," Caleb said, and he meant it. "I told you about Sarah and Emma. Those ghosts don't go away just because we signed some papers. We both know that." "Thank you," she whispered. He left her to her tears, understanding that some grief needed privacy. But later that night, when he heard her crying through the wall, he found himself standing outside her door, his hand raised to knock. He didn't, but he stood there for a long time, listening, wishing he knew how to help. The box arrived 2 weeks later, and Nora went through it alone. When she emerged, she was wearing a locket that Caleb had never seen before. "Samuel gave it to me on our wedding day," she explained, touching it lightly. "It has a picture of him inside, and there's space for Eli's picture too when I can get one made. It's nice." "I know this is strange, me wearing another man's gift." "It's not strange. It's honest. That's worth more." She smiled at him, and Caleb realized he was starting to like making her smile. It felt like winning something. But their fragile peace couldn't last forever. The world had a way of finding cracks and exploiting them. And the crack that would test everything was coming, though they didn't know it yet. It started with a letter addressed to Mrs. Nora Mercer, delivered by a courier from Oklahoma City who charged $5 just for making the trip. Caleb was the one who signed for it. He brought it inside and handed it to Nora, watching as her face went pale. "What is it?" he asked. She stared at the envelope like it was a snake. "It's from Victor." "Who's Victor?" "My husband's brother, Eli's uncle." Her hand shook as she opened it. She read in silence, her expression growing darker with each line. When she finished, she handed it to Caleb without a word. The letter was formal, written in the precise script of someone who'd paid for expensive education. It expressed Victor Whitaker's belated condolences on his brother's death, his concern for young Eli's welfare, and his desire to discuss the boy's future in person. "He's coming here," Nora said flatly, "in 2 weeks. So, let him come." "You don't understand. Victor never cared about Eli. Never visited. Never wrote. When Samuel died, Victor didn't even come to the funeral." Her voice shook. "If he's coming now, it's because he wants something." "What could he want?" She met his eyes, and he saw fear there, real, bone-deep fear. Eli. And Caleb understood then that their biggest fight wasn't with small-town gossip or their own guarded hearts. It was coming for them in 2 weeks, and it wore the face of family. Victor Whitaker arrived exactly 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon when the heat made the air shimmer like broken glass. Caleb saw the carriage first, black lacquered wood that caught the sun, pulled by a matched pair of chestnuts that probably cost more than his entire cattle herd. It was the kind of vehicle that announced wealth and status before its occupant ever stepped out, and Caleb felt his gut tighten with instinctive dislike. He was mending tack on the porch when the carriage rolled to a stop in front of the house. Nora appeared in the doorway behind him, and he felt her tension like a physical presence. "Stay calm," he said quietly. I am calm. She wasn't. Her hands were clenched in her apron, her knuckles white. The carriage door opened and Victor Whitaker emerged. He was a tall man, maybe 40, with the kind of polished appearance that spoke of barbers and tailors and never having done a day's hard labor in his life. His suit was dark wool despite the heat. His shoes shined to a mirror finish. He had Samuel's build. Caleb could see the family resemblance. But where Samuel had been kind, everything about Victor suggested cold calculation. Behind him came another man, shorter and rounder, carrying a leather satchel. A lawyer, Caleb guessed. This was already worse than he'd thought. Nora, Victor said, his voice smooth and cultured, how wonderful to see you looking so well. Victor, her voice was flat. You didn't mention you were bringing company. This is Mr. Harrison, my attorney. I thought it prudent to have legal counsel for our discussion. Victor's gaze swept over the ranch house, the barn, the dusty yard, and Caleb could see the judgment in his eyes. Quite the rustic situation you've found yourself in. It's home. Is it? Victor's attention shifted to Caleb. And you must be the rancher who swept my dear sister-in-law off her feet. Victor Whitaker. He extended his hand. Caleb didn't take it. I know who you are. Victor's smile didn't falter, but something cold flickered in his eyes. He lowered his hand. Direct. I appreciate that. Shall we speak inside? I've traveled a long way. Nora stepped back reluctantly, letting them enter. Caleb followed, positioning himself near Nora. The lawyer, Harrison, settled into a chair and pulled papers from his satchel. Victor remained standing, his gaze moving around the room with the assessing eye of someone appraising property. Where is young Eli? Victor asked. I was hoping to see my nephew. He's with one of the ranch hands, Nora said, learning about horses. How educational. Though I must say, Nora, I was surprised to receive word of your marriage. You didn't think to inform the family? You're not family, Nora said quietly. You never visited? Never wrote? When Samuel died, you didn't even— I was away on business, Victor interrupted smoothly. By the time I heard, the funeral had passed, a regret I carry still. He didn't sound regretful, but I'm here now and I'm concerned about my nephew's welfare. His welfare is fine. Is it? Living on a remote ranch with a man you barely know? Nora, you must see how this looks. Caleb's hands curled into fists. She knows me well enough. We're married. Ah, yes, the convenient marriage. How long were you acquainted before the wedding? A month? Less? That's none of your business. It becomes my business when it concerns my brother's son. Victor turned back to Nora. I understand times have been difficult. I understand you did what you thought necessary. But Eli deserves stability, a proper home, education, opportunities that, frankly, this place cannot provide. He has all of that here, Nora said, but her voice wavered. Does he? Or is he being raised by cowboys and working cattle before he's old enough to read? Victor's voice took on a gentler tone, which somehow made it worse. Nora, I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to help. Samuel would have wanted his son to have advantages, to grow up as a Whitaker should. And how is that? Caleb demanded. With a silver spoon and no idea how the real world works? Victor's eyes narrowed. The real world, Mr. Mercer, includes things like education, culture, and social standing, things that will serve Eli far better than learning to rope cattle. He's 4 years old. Exactly. His formative years, the foundation for everything he'll become. Victor moved closer to Nora. I have resources. A home in Kansas City with staff, tutors. I can ensure Eli receives the finest education available. He'll want for nothing. He wants for nothing now, Nora said, but there was a tremor in her voice that Caleb didn't like. Doesn't he? Or are you simply telling yourself that to make peace with this situation? Victor gestured around the sparse room. Be honest, Nora. Is this really the life you want for your son? It's the life we have. But it doesn't have to be. That's what I'm offering, a better option. Caleb stepped forward. She's not interested, neither is the boy. You've had your say, now you can leave. I'm afraid it's not that simple. Victor nodded to Harrison, who produced a document from his satchel. This is a petition for custody, filed with the territorial court. It requests that Eli be placed in my care as his closest blood relative." The room went silent. Nora's face drained of color. "You can't do that," she whispered. "I can and I have. The court date is set for 3 weeks from now in Oklahoma City." Victor's voice remained smooth, reasonable. "I didn't want it to come to this, but you've left me no choice. My brother's son deserves better than this hardscrabble existence." "You son of a bitch," Caleb said quietly. "Mr. Mercer, I understand you're emotionally invested, but legally speaking, you have no standing. You're not Eli's father. You're a stranger who married his mother under questionable circumstances." "Questionable?" Harrison spoke for the first time, his voice reedy. "The timing of the marriage raises concerns about legitimacy. It could be argued that Mrs. Mercer, entered into this union solely to maintain custody, which would constitute fraud." "That's insane," Nora said. "Is it? You were destitute, desperate. Mr. Mercer offered shelter and suddenly you're married?" Harrison shook his head. "A court might view that as a marriage of convenience rather than a legitimate union." Caleb wanted to hit something. The smug expression on Harrison's face, the calculated calm of Victor, the way Nora was shrinking into herself, walls collapsing. "Get out," he said. "We're only trying to do what's best for I said get out, now, before I throw you out." Victor studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "Very well. We'll see you in court, Mr. Mercer." "Nora." He inclined his head. "Think about what I've said. This doesn't have to be a battle. You could simply agree to let Eli come with me. It would be easier for everyone, especially the boy." They left, the carriage rolling away in a cloud of dust. Caleb watched until it disappeared, then turned to find Nora sitting on the sofa, her face buried in her hands. "He's going to take him," she said. "He's going to take Eli, and there's nothing I can do." "Like hell there isn't. You heard them. The court will see our marriage as fraud. They'll see me as unfit, a homeless widow who latched onto the first man who'd take her in." "That's not what happened, isn't it?" She looked up at him, eyes red. "Be honest, Caleb. We got married to stop gossip, to make things easier. Not because we love each other, not because you wanted to be Eli's father. And a court will see that. They'll see through us in seconds." Caleb paced the room, his mind racing. She was right. A judge would take one look at their situation and see exactly what it was. A practical arrangement between two damaged people. Against that, Victor had wealth, status, and blood relation. The odds were impossible. "There has to be something," he said. "A lawyer, someone who can fight this." "With what money?" "Victor has resources. We have a ranch that barely turns a profit. I've got savings. Not enough. Not for this." Nora stood, wrapping her arms around herself. "I need to tell Eli." "Not yet." "He needs to know." "Not yet," Caleb repeated. "Let him have a few more days of normal. Once we tell him, everything changes." She nodded slowly, then went upstairs without another word. Caleb stood in the empty room and tried to think of a solution that didn't exist. That night, he rode into Copperhead Springs and found the only lawyer in town, a man named Jacob Finch, who worked out of a cramped office above the bank. Finch was maybe 60, with gray hair and tired eyes, but he listened while Caleb explained the situation. "You're in trouble," Finch said bluntly when Caleb finished. "I know that. Can you help?" "Maybe. But I'll be honest with you, Mercer. The law favors blood relatives, especially wealthy ones. Victor Whitaker has every advantage. What about the fact that he never gave a damn about the boy until now? You'd have to prove that. And even if you could, it doesn't change the fundamental question the court will ask. Where is the child better off? With his blood uncle who can provide education, stability, and wealth? Or with his mother and her new husband who live on a struggling ranch? The ranch isn't struggling. Compared to Victor Whitaker's holdings? Yes, it is. Finch leaned back in his chair. There is one approach that might work. If you can demonstrate that your marriage is legitimate, that you formed a genuine family unit, it could sway the judge. The court generally prefers to keep children with their mothers when possible. How do we prove it's legitimate? Evidence of a real partnership, shared finances, witnesses who can testify to the nature of your relationship, proof that you've taken an active role in the boy's life. Finch paused. And ideally, the child himself testifying that he wants to stay with you. He's 4 years old. old enough to express a preference. Judges listen to children, especially at that age. If Eli makes it clear he wants to stay with his mother and you, it carries weight. Caleb left Finch's office with a plan that felt like building a house on sand. Everything depended on convincing a judge that their marriage was real, that they were a family. And the truth was complicated. When he got back to the ranch, he found Nora still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with cold tea. "I talked to a lawyer," he said. "And?" He told her what Finch had said. She listened in silence, her expression unreadable. "So we have to pretend," she said when he finished.
Not pretend, just show what's real. What's real is that we're two people who got married for practical reasons.
That's not going to convince anyone. Maybe not, but there's more to it than that now. Caleb sat down across from her. "You work harder than anyone I've ever known. You've made this place feel like a home. Eli's thriving here. Those things are real. That's what we show them. And if it's not enough, then we fight anyway. Because the alternative is letting Victor take him without a fight, and I won't do that." She studied him across the table. "Why? Why do you care so much? You barely knew us 3 months ago." It was the same question she'd asked before, and Caleb still didn't have a good answer, or maybe he did and was afraid to say it out loud. "Because somewhere along the way you stopped being strangers," he said finally. "Both of you. And I'm not letting some rich bastard tear apart what we've built just because he's got money and a last name." Nora's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared." "I know. What if we lose? Then we figure out the next step, but we're not losing without a fight." She reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time they'd deliberately touched since the wedding, and Caleb felt the contact like electricity. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat there in the dim kitchen, hands clasped, and Caleb made a silent promise to himself that he would do whatever it took to keep this family together, even if it meant admitting truths he'd been avoiding. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Finch filed their response to Victor's petition and gathered witnesses. Tommy and the other ranch hands, the shopkeeper who'd watched Nora transform from desperate widow to capable rancher's wife, even the doctor who'd treated Eli for a minor scrape and could testify to the boy's good health. Caleb and Nora worked on presenting a united front. They started taking meals together as a family, all three of them at the table. Caleb taught Eli to ride properly, spending hours in the corral while the boy learned to control a gentle mare. Nora mended Caleb's shirts, and he fixed things around the house she'd been managing alone. To an outside observer, it probably looked like a real marriage. And the strange thing was, it started to feel like one. They still slept in separate rooms, they still maintained their emotional distance. But there were moments, small ones, when Caleb caught himself watching Nora while she worked and feeling something that had nothing to do with practicality. When she smiled at him over Eli's head after the boy said something funny. When she touched his arm in passing and let her hand linger a second longer than necessary. He didn't name these feelings, didn't examine them too closely. There was too much at stake to complicate things further. The night before the court date, Caleb found Nora packing a bag for the trip to Oklahoma City. "You should try to sleep," he said. "Can't. Too nervous." "We're ready. Finch has our case prepared." "I keep thinking about what Victor said, about Eli deserving better." She folded a shirt with mechanical precision. "What if he's right?" "He's not." "How do you know? Maybe Eli would be better off with education and opportunities and what? A cold uncle who sees him as a possession, who didn't care enough to visit when his father died but suddenly shows up demanding custody?" Caleb moved closer. "Money doesn't make a family. Victor can give Eli things. We give him a home." "Is it enough?" "It has to be." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Caleb saw the fear beneath her composure. Not just fear of losing Eli, but fear that she'd somehow failed as a mother by ending up in this situation. "Hey," he said quietly. "You're a good mother, the best. Don't let Victor make you doubt that. I let my son sleep in a barn. I let him get so sick he almost died. You did what you had to do to survive. And when you couldn't do it alone, you asked for help. That's not weakness. That's strength." A tear slipped down her cheek, then another. Caleb did something he'd never done before. He pulled her into his arms. She resisted for half a second, then collapsed against him, her body shaking with silent sobs. He held her while she cried, one hand awkwardly patting her back, feeling completely out of his depth, but unwilling to let go. When she finally pulled away, her face was blotchy and her eyes were red, but some of the tension had left her shoulders. "Sorry," she said, wiping her eyes. "Don't be. I got tears all over your shirt. I've got other shirts." She laughed, a watery sound, and Caleb felt something warm spread through his chest. They rode to Oklahoma City the next morning, leaving before dawn. Eli sat between them in the wagon, excited about the adventure and oblivious to the stakes. Caleb had told him they were going to the city to talk to a judge, making it sound like a normal errand rather than a battle for his future. Oklahoma City was bigger and louder than Copperhead Springs, with streets crowded with wagons and people and noise. They met Finch at his temporary office, a rented room near the courthouse, and went over the plan one final time. "Let me do most of the talking," Finch said. "Answer questions directly, but don't volunteer information. And Mr. Mercer, try to control your temper. I know Victor gets under your skin, but antagonizing him in court won't help. I'll behave. See that you do." The courthouse was an imposing building of red brick and white columns. Inside, the corridors were cool and dim, their footsteps echoing. They were shown to a courtroom that smelled of old wood and leather. Victor was already there with Harrison and two other lawyers Caleb didn't recognize. The show of legal force was clearly meant to intimidate, and it worked. Nora's hand found his, squeezing tight. The judge entered, a man named Crawford, maybe 50, with a stern face and gray mutton chops. Everyone stood until he was seated, then the bailiff called the case. "Petition for custody regarding Eli Samuel Whitaker, minor child," the bailiff intoned. "Petitioner Victor Whitaker versus respondents Nora and Caleb Mercer." Harrison stood first, laying out Victor's case with smooth precision. He painted a picture of a grieving uncle discovering his nephew living in questionable circumstances, a rushed marriage that seemed designed to circumvent proper custody arrangements, a remote ranch where educational opportunities were non-existent and the boy's future was limited. "Mr. Whitaker seeks only what any loving uncle would want," Harrison concluded, "to provide his brother's son with the advantages and opportunities befitting his station, to ensure the boy grows up knowing his family heritage and receiving proper guidance." Finch stood to respond, but his plain speaking and simple arguments felt weak against Harrison's polished rhetoric. He emphasized Nora's rights as mother, the stability of the ranch, Caleb's role as stepfather, but even to Caleb's ears it sounded defensive. Then the witnesses started. Victor called first, a character witness from Kansas City who testified that Samuel Whitaker had been a respected member of the community, implying that his son deserved the same social standing. Then a child development expert who opined that children benefit from educational opportunities and cultural enrichment. Everything felt designed to make the ranch seem inadequate by comparison. When it was their turn, Finch called Tommy, who testified about the transformation he'd seen in Eli, from a sick, frightened child to a happy, healthy boy who was learning and growing. The doctor confirmed Eli's good health. A neighbor testified to Nora's character and work ethic, but the real moment came when the judge asked to speak with Eli directly. The boy was brought forward, small and serious in his best clothes. The judge's expression softened slightly. "Hello, Eli. Do you know why you're here?" "Yes, sir. They want to know where I should live." "That's right. And I'd like to hear what you think about that. Do you understand?" Eli nodded. "Tell me about your home. Where do you live now?" "On Mr. Caleb's ranch, with Mama." "Do you like it there?" "Yes, sir. It's real nice. I have my own room and Mr. Caleb is teaching me about horses and Mama makes good biscuits." Despite the tension, several people in the courtroom smiled. "What about your Uncle Victor? Do you know him?" Eli's face scrunched up in thought. "I met him yesterday. He gave me candy." "That was kind of him. He wants you to come live with him in Kansas City. Would you like that?" "I don't know. I've never been there. But if you could choose, stay on the ranch with your mother and Mr. Caleb, or go to Kansas City with your uncle. Which would you choose?" Eli didn't hesitate. "The ranch. That's home." "Why is it home?" The boy thought about this with endearing seriousness. "Because Mama's there, and Mr. Caleb, and my horse, and I know where everything is, and—" He paused, searching for words. "And when I'm scared at night, Mama sings to me. And when I fall down, Mr. Caleb picks me up. And that's what home is. People who take care of you."
The courtroom was silent. Caleb felt Nora's hand tighten in his again, her breathing unsteady. Judge Crawford nodded slowly. "Thank you, Eli. You can sit down now." The boy returned to his seat between Caleb and Nora, seemingly unaware that he might have just saved their family. But Victor wasn't finished. Harrison called him to the stand, and Victor played the role of concerned uncle perfectly. He spoke about his brother with what sounded like genuine affection. He talked about wanting to honor Samuel's memory by ensuring his son had every advantage. "The question isn't whether Mrs. Mercer loves her son," Victor said, his voice heavy with false sympathy. "I'm sure she does. But love isn't always enough. Eli deserves education, culture, social opportunities. The ranch simply cannot provide those things." "And you can?" Finch asked on cross-examination. "Yes, I have the means and the desire to give Eli everything my brother would have wanted for him. Everything except what the boy actually wants, to stay with his mother." Victor's expression hardened slightly. Children don't always know what's best for them. That's why adults make these decisions. "Indeed. And Mrs. Mercer, as his mother, has made the decision to raise him on the ranch. Why should your judgment supersede hers?" "Because my judgment isn't clouded by desperation or a questionable marriage entered into for convenience," Finch pounced. "Questionable how? The timing speaks for itself. Mrs. Mercer needed security. Mr. Mercer needed, well, I'll leave that to speculation. But a marriage of barely 2 months is hardly a solid foundation for raising a child." "Objection," Finch said. "Speculation and character assassination." "Sustained," Judge Crawford said. "Mr. Whitaker, stick to facts." But the damage was done. Victor had planted the seed that their marriage was a sham. Then Finch made a decision that Caleb later realized was both risky and brilliant. He called Caleb to the stand. Caleb had never been more uncomfortable in his life. The courtroom felt too small, too hot. Every eye was on him as he took his seat. "Mr. Mercer," Finch began, "how long have you known Mrs. Mercer?" "About 4 months. And you married after how long?" "About 6 weeks." Murmurs in the courtroom. Finch pressed on. "That's quite fast. Why the rush?" Caleb looked at Nora, then at Eli, then back at Finch. This was it. The moment where he had to make their marriage sound real or lose everything. "Because I didn't want to lose them," he said quietly. "Explain." "When Nora and Eli showed up at my ranch, I'd spent 5 years telling myself I didn't need anybody. That being alone was safer, easier." His throat felt tight. "Then there was this woman who'd walked 8 miles carrying a sick kid, who'd been turned away by every decent person in town, who collapsed on my porch and still had the strength to beg for her son's life. And there was this little boy who looked at me like I wasn't broken, like I could be someone worth trusting. He wasn't supposed to be saying this, wasn't supposed to be this honest, but the words kept coming. I told myself I was just helping temporarily, that they'd leave when the boy got better. But then Nora started making the house feel like a home, and Eli started following me around asking questions, and I started to remember what it felt like to be part of something." He paused, swallowing hard. "When people in town started gossiping, I offered marriage because I wanted to protect them. But somewhere between the proposal and now, it stopped being just protection. It became real." "Real how?" Finch asked gently. "Real like I care if she's happy. Real like I want to teach that boy everything I know. Real like the thought of losing either of them makes me feel like I can't breathe." Caleb's voice cracked. "I lost a family once, my wife and daughter. Fever took them both, and I thought I'd never survive it. So I built walls, high ones, and Nora and Eli just walked right through them like they weren't even there." The courtroom was dead silent. "So yeah," Caleb continued, "we got married fast. Maybe too fast by some people's standards. But I've known her for 4 months, and I know her better than I knew my first wife after 2 years. I know she hums when she's happy and goes quiet when she's scared. I know she'd starve before letting Eli go hungry. I know she's stronger than anyone I've ever met, and she doesn't even see it. And I know that boy deserves to grow up with a mother who loves him more than her own life, and a stepfather who'd fight hell itself to keep him safe." He looked directly at Victor. "Money can buy a lot of things. Education, opportunities, fancy houses. But it can't buy what we have, and that's a family, a real one, built on choice and sacrifice and showing up every day, even when it's hard." Caleb turned to Judge Crawford. "I'm not saying I'm the best man for this job.
I'm rough around the edges and I don't know much about raising kids, but I'm learning, and I love that boy like he's my own, and I love his mother." The words came out before he could stop them, surprising him as much as anyone. So if the question is where Eli belongs, the answer is simple: with his family, with us. He stepped down from the stand on shaking legs, avoiding Nora's eyes because he couldn't face whatever he'd see there. He just laid himself bare in front of a courtroom full of strangers, admitted things he'd barely admitted to himself. Harrison tried to recover on redirect, suggesting Caleb's emotional testimony was merely performance, but the words had rung too true, too raw to be dismissed. Finally, after what felt like hours, Judge Crawford called for a recess to consider his decision. They waited in a small room down the hall: Caleb, Nora, Eli, and Finch. Nobody spoke. Eli dozed against his mother's shoulder. Nora stared at the wall. Caleb paced. After 30 minutes, they were called back. Judge Crawford looked tired. He surveyed the courtroom, his gaze lingering on Eli, then Nora, then Caleb, and finally Victor. "This is a difficult case," he began. "On paper, Mr. Whitaker presents a compelling argument. He has resources, education, social standing. He is blood kin. Under normal circumstances, these factors would weigh heavily in his favor." Caleb's heart sank. "However," Crawford continued, "this court must consider more than material advantages. It must consider the child's best interests in a holistic sense: stability, love, family bonds." He looked at Eli. That young man spoke clearly about where he considers home to be, and while children's wishes are not determinative, they carry significant weight. Then he looked at Caleb. Mr. Mercer's testimony was illuminating. This court has heard many custody cases, and I can usually tell when someone is performing for the judge. That was not performance. That was truth. Victor shifted in his seat, his confidence finally cracking. "Therefore," Crawford said, "I am denying the petition for custody transfer. Eli Whitaker will remain with his mother and stepfather. Full custody is granted to Nora and Caleb Mercer." The gavel came down, and Caleb's knees nearly gave out. Nora made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Eli woke up, confused. "Did we win?" "Yes, baby," Nora whispered. "We won." Victor stood, his face dark with fury. "This is a travesty. I'll appeal." "You may certainly try," Crawford said mildly, "but I should warn you that this decision is based on substantial evidence of the child's welfare. An appeal is unlikely to succeed and will only drag the boy through further trauma. I suggest you accept this ruling and perhaps focus on building a relationship with your nephew within the context his mother establishes." Victor looked like he wanted to argue, but Harrison put a hand on his arm, shaking his head. They left without another word, Victor's expensive shoes echoing on the marble floor. Finch shook Caleb's hand. "Well done! That testimony, I've never seen anything like it. Thanks for taking the case. Thank you for reminding me why I became a lawyer, to help families stay together." They left the courthouse into bright afternoon sun. Eli was chattering about the judge's big chair and could he have one for the ranch? Nora was quiet, her hand in Caleb's, her shoulder brushing his as they walked. It wasn't until they were in the wagon heading back to Copperhead Springs that she finally spoke. "Did you mean it?" she asked quietly. Eli was asleep between them, exhausted by the day. "Mean what?" "What you said in there, about loving me." Caleb kept his eyes on the road. "I didn't plan to say it." "That's not an answer." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Yeah, I meant it." "Oh." He glanced at her. "Is that okay?" She smiled and it transformed her face. "Yeah, it's okay, because I think I might love you too." They drove in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Comfortable, full of possibility. When they reached the ranch hours later, the sun was setting, painting the prairie in gold and orange. Caleb helped Nora down from the wagon, and for a moment they just stood there, Eli still sleeping in the wagon bed behind them. "We did it," Nora said. We did. He's really ours, legally. Legally and every other way that matters." She looked up at him, and Caleb saw something in her eyes that made his chest tight. Without thinking too hard about it, he leaned down and kissed her. It was tentative at first, a question more than a statement. But then she kissed him back, her hands coming up to his chest, and it became something more. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "We should get Eli inside," Nora said. "Yeah." But neither of them moved. From the wagon, Eli's sleepy voice called out, "Are we home yet?" Caleb looked at Nora. Nora looked at Caleb. And together they answered, "Yeah, kid, we're home." That kiss changed things, though neither of them acknowledged it directly for days afterward. Caleb carried Eli inside and up to bed while Nora made tea. Neither of them drank. They sat at the kitchen table like they had so many nights before, but the air between them felt different, charged, like standing too close to lightning.
"I should sleep," Nora said finally. "Yeah." Neither moved. "Caleb, I know." "You don't know what I was going to say." "Doesn't matter. Whatever it is, I know." She smiled despite herself. "You're impossible." "So I've been told." She stood, paused beside his chair, and then, quickly, like she might lose her nerve, bent down and kissed the top of his head. "Good night." "Good night."
He sat there long after she'd gone upstairs, touching the spot where her lips had pressed, feeling like a damn fool and not caring one bit. The next morning brought news that wiped the smile off his face. Tommy came galloping up to the house before breakfast, his horse lathered and his face white. "Boss, we got trouble." Caleb was outside immediately. "What kind?" "Fence is down on the north pasture. Looks like it was cut deliberate, and there's cattle missing, maybe 20 head. Rustlers?" "I don't know, but it wasn't weather that took down that fence." Caleb swore under his breath. "Get the other hands. I want everyone armed and ready to ride in 10 minutes. You think they'll come back?" "I think someone's sending a message." And Caleb had a pretty good idea who that someone was. He went inside to find Nora already dressed, having heard the commotion. "What's wrong?" "Cattle missing, fence cut. I need to ride out." "Is it Victor?" "I don't know. Maybe." He grabbed his rifle from above the door. "Stay in the house. Keep Eli inside. If anyone comes around that you don't know, you use that shotgun I showed you where to find. You think he'd... I don't know what he'd do. But I'm not taking chances." He paused, looking at her. "Promise me you'll be careful." "I promise. You too." He wanted to kiss her. Instead, he nodded and headed out. They found the fence exactly as Tommy described. Wire cut clean through in 3 places, posts knocked over. The tracks told a story. At least 3 horses, maybe 4, herding cattle north toward the territorial border. The trail was fresh, maybe 6 hours old. "We going after them?" Tommy asked. Caleb studied the horizon. "No, that's what they want. Draw us off the ranch, leave it unprotected." "So we just let them take our cattle?" "I didn't say that." Caleb turned to the other hands. "You two stay here, repair this fence, keep watch. Tommy, you're with me. We're going to town." "What for?" "To file a report with the marshal, and to have a conversation with Victor Whitaker." They found Victor at the Copperhead Hotel, the nicest establishment in town, which wasn't saying much. He was having breakfast in the dining room when Caleb walked in, and the man had the audacity to smile. "Mr. Mercer, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I had 20 head of cattle stolen last night. You know anything about that?" "Why would I know about your ranch operations?" "Because it happened the day after you lost in court. Seems like quite a coincidence." Victor set down his coffee cup with exaggerated care. "Are you accusing me of cattle theft?" "I'm saying I find the timing interesting." "I'm a businessman, Mr. Mercer, not a rustler. If you've had losses, perhaps you should examine your own security rather than making baseless accusations." His voice carried through the dining room, and several other diners turned to watch. Caleb stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Let me be clear. You lost. The court said Eli stays with us. Now you can accept that like a man, or you can keep playing these games. But if anything, and I mean anything, happens to my family or my property, I will hold you personally responsible." "Threats, Mr. Mercer?" "Facts." Victor's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "I'll be in town for a few more days settling my affairs. After that, I'll return to Kansas City. You'll never see me again." "Good. But let me give you some advice, rancher to businessman. The court may have ruled in your favor today, but circumstances change. Finances fluctuate. Accidents happen. It would be a shame if you found yourself unable to provide for that boy. The court does periodic welfare checks, you know. If Eli's situation were to deteriorate, it won't. I certainly hope not, for his sake." Victor returned to his breakfast. Now, if you'll excuse me, my eggs are getting cold." Caleb wanted to drag the man outside and beat some decency into him. Instead, he turned and walked out, his hands clenched into fists. Tommy was waiting outside. "That went well?" "Shut up." "Did he admit anything?" "He didn't have to, but he can't prove anything either." Caleb headed toward the marshal's office. "We're filing the report anyway, creating a record." Marshal Dawson was a weathered man in his 50s who'd seen too much trouble to be surprised by much anymore. He took their report with professional detachment. "I can send word to the neighboring counties," Dawson said. "But without witnesses or proof of who did it, there's not much else I can do." "What about the timing? Whitaker loses custody yesterday. My cattle disappear last night. Coincidence isn't evidence, Mercer. You know that." Dawson leaned back in his chair. "Look, between you and me, I wouldn't put it past a man like Whitaker to hire someone to cause you trouble, but hiring and doing are different things in the eyes of the law. Unless you catch someone in the act or get a confession, my hands are tied." "So he can just harass us?" "I didn't say that. I'm saying be smart. Keep your ranch secure, document anything suspicious. And if you catch anyone trespassing or damaging property, you have every right to defend what's yours." It wasn't the answer Caleb wanted, but it was the one he expected. Over the next week, small disasters plagued the ranch. A water trough was poisoned, killing 2 horses. Fence wire disappeared from the barn overnight. One of the hands quit abruptly, claiming he'd been offered better wages elsewhere. By whom, he wouldn't say. Through it all, Victor remained visible in town, always somewhere public with witnesses who could testify. He was nowhere near the ranch when trouble occurred. "He's smart," Nora said one night after Eli had gone to bed. "He's trying to bleed us dry without getting his own hands dirty." "I know." "What do we do?" "We keep going. We don't give him the satisfaction of seeing us break." But the strain was showing. The ranch hands were nervous, jumpy. Income was down from the lost cattle. And worst of all, Caleb could see the fear creeping back into Nora's eyes. The same fear that had been there when she'd collapsed on his porch. Then, 3 days before Victor was supposed to leave town, something unexpected happened. A woman arrived at the ranch in a private carriage. Not as expensive as Victor's, but substantial. She was perhaps 65, dressed in black, with silver hair pinned severely and eyes that missed nothing. Caleb met her on the porch. "Can I help you?" "I certainly hope so. My name is Eleanor Whitaker. Victor is my son." Every muscle in Caleb's body tensed. "Ma'am, if you're here to—" "I'm here to see my grandson, and to speak with his mother. May I come in?" Something in her tone made Caleb step aside. He called for Nora, who appeared from the kitchen with flour on her hands and stopped dead when she saw their visitor. "Eleanor." "Nora, dear, it's been far too long." The 2 women stood across from each other, and Caleb could feel the weight of history between them. "You didn't come to Samuel's funeral," Nora said quietly. "I was in Europe. By the time I received word and returned, months had passed. I wrote to you, but the letters were returned. You'd already left Kansas City." "Because I had no money and nowhere to go." Eleanor's expression softened. "I know, and I'm sorry. If I'd known your circumstances, I would have helped. I'm here now because I need to understand what my son is doing." They moved into the kitchen. Caleb made coffee while the women talked, and Eleanor's composure cracked as Nora explained everything. The eviction, the desperate search for work, the illness, the collapse at the ranch. "I knew none of this," Eleanor said, her voice tight. "Victor told me you'd remarried quickly and were living on a ranch. He made it sound like you'd landed on your feet. He said he was concerned about Eli's education, that he wanted to provide opportunities." "He wants to control Eli's inheritance," Nora said bluntly. "Samuel left everything to Eli in a trust. It's not a fortune, but it's substantial. Victor can't touch it unless he has custody." Eleanor closed her eyes. "Of course, I should have known." "You didn't know?" "I knew my son had debts, gambling, bad investments, but I didn't know he'd stoop to this, using his own nephew." She opened her eyes, and they were blazing with anger. "Where is Victor now?" "In town, at the hotel." "Good. I need to speak with him, but first—" She looked at Caleb. "You're the rancher who married my daughter-in-law." "Yes, ma'am." "Victor says the marriage is fraudulent, a scheme." Caleb met her gaze steadily. "Your son says a lot of things. Most of them are lies."
Is the marriage real? Yes. You love her? Yes. And my grandson? He's my son in every way that matters. Eleanor studied him for a long moment, then nodded. I believe you, and I'm going to help you. How?
By doing what I should have done years ago, standing up to my son. She left with a promise to return, and Caleb watched her carriage disappear down the road. Can we trust her? He asked Nora. I don't know. But she's the only person in Victor's family who ever showed me kindness. When Samuel and I married, everyone else treated me like I was marrying above my station. Eleanor was different. She welcomed me. Then we wait and see what happens. They didn't have to wait long. The next morning, the entire town was buzzing with news. Eleanor Whitaker had confronted her son in the hotel dining room, publicly, loudly, and with the kind of upper-class fury that made hardened cowboys step back. Tommy heard it from the bartender, who heard it from a maid, who'd witnessed the whole thing. She laid into him like nothing I ever seen, the bartender told Tommy. Called him a disgrace to the family name, said he was a gambler and a coward who'd stooped to stealing from a child. Victor tried to deny it, but she had papers, bank statements, gambling debts, everything. She told him she knew what he was doing and she wouldn't allow it. What did Victor say? Tried to talk his way out of it at first. Then he got angry, said some things he probably shouldn't have. That's when she really let him have it. Told him she was cutting off his allowance, and if he didn't leave Nora and Eli alone, she'd make sure everyone in Kansas City knew exactly what kind of man he was. When Eleanor returned to the ranch that afternoon, she looked exhausted but satisfied. It's done, she told Nora and Caleb. Victor is leaving tomorrow. He won't bother you again. How can you be sure? Nora asked. Because I control the family finances. His father left everything to me, with provisions for our children. Victor has been living off an allowance for years, supplemented by increasingly desperate investments. He's deeply in debt, and I'm the only thing standing between him and complete ruin. Her voice was cold. I've made it clear that if he continues this crusade against you, I will withdraw all support. He'll lose everything. He'll hate you for this, Nora said. He already does, but I'd rather have his hatred than his lack of respect. What he tried to do to you and Eli, using that child to pay his gambling debts, it's unconscionable. Eleanor took Nora's hands. I failed you when Samuel died. I wasn't there when you needed family. I can't change that, but I can make sure you're protected now. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I have conditions. Caleb tensed, but Eleanor's smile was genuine. I want to be part of Eli's life. Not to interfere, but to know him. He's my grandson, my only connection to Samuel. Will you allow that? Nora looked at Caleb, who nodded. Yes, she said. We'd like that. Good. Then I'll visit periodically, if that's acceptable. And I'll establish an account for Eli's education when the time comes. Not to replace what you provide, but to supplement it. She looked around the ranch house. This is a good home. Samuel would have approved. After Eleanor left, promising to return in a few months, Caleb and Nora stood on the porch watching the sunset. Is it really over? Nora asked. I think so. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. Maybe there is no other shoe. Maybe we actually won. She leaned against him and he put his arm around her shoulders. It felt natural now, easy in a way it hadn't been even a week ago. Caleb? Yeah? In the courtroom, when you said you loved me, did you mean it as it is now or as what it could be? He thought about that. Both, I think. I love who you are, and I love the possibility of who we could become together. That's a good answer. I have my moments. She turned to face him, her hands on his chest. I need to tell you something. His heart rate picked up. Okay. That first night, when I collapsed here, I wasn't just desperate. I was hopeless. I'd given up. If you hadn't helped us, I don't know what I would have done. Her voice shook. You saved our lives, and then you gave us more than survival. You gave us a home, a family, a future, and I don't know how to repay that. You don't have to repay anything. Let me finish. She took a breath. I married you for protection, for Eli's sake. But somewhere along the way, it became more. You became more. And I'm scared because I lost one husband, and I don't know if I can survive losing another. You're not going to lose me. You can't promise that. No, I can't, but I can promise I'll fight like hell to stick around. He cupped her face in his hands. I'm scared too. I lost everything once, spent 5 years building walls to make sure it couldn't happen again. Then you showed up and kicked those walls down without even trying. Sorry. Don't be. Best thing that ever happened to me. He kissed her forehead. We're both broken, Nora. But maybe broken things can fit together better than perfect ones. Maybe that's what makes this work. You really believe that? I'm starting to. She kissed him then, properly this time, not tentative like before, but certain. Sure. And Caleb kissed her back with 5 years of loneliness and loss and hope he'd thought was dead. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Nora said, I think we should try this for real. We are real. No, I mean separate rooms, keeping distance, being careful. I don't want that anymore. I want to be your wife. Actually, your wife. Caleb's throat went dry. You sure? Terrified, but sure. Me too. Both parts. They went inside together, and for the first time since their wedding, Caleb didn't sleep alone. The next morning, Victor left Copperhead Springs without a word. Caleb watched the carriage disappear from the porch, one arm around Nora and the other resting on Eli's shoulder. Is the bad man gone? Eli asked. Yeah, kid, he's gone. Good. I didn't like him. Neither did I. Can we work with the horses now? After breakfast, Eli ran inside, already shouting about whether they could teach the new colt to jump. Nora laughed, the sound light and free in a way Caleb had never heard before. He's relentless, she said. Wonder where he gets that. Are you implying I'm relentless? I'm saying you walked 8 miles carrying a sick child and didn't give up even when you probably should have. So yeah, relentless. She smiled. I'll take that as a compliment. It is one. They stood there a moment longer watching the empty road where Victor's carriage had disappeared. It's really over, Nora said softly. Yeah. What do we do now? Caleb thought about that, about the ranch that needed work, the cattle that needed tending, the fences that needed mending, about the boy inside who'd need teaching and raising and loving, about the woman beside him who'd somehow become the center of his world. Now, he said, now we live. The weeks that followed were the best of Caleb's life, though he'd never admit it out loud. The ranch settled back into routine, but it was a better routine than before. Nora was still up before dawn, but now Caleb woke with her, and they shared coffee in the quiet before the world demanded their attention. They worked side by side, her managing the house and books, him handling the cattle and land. And at night, they fell into bed together, learning each other in ways that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with choice. Eli thrived. The boy was 5 now. They'd celebrated his birthday with cake that Nora made and gifts that Caleb carved from wood. A horse of his own, a small mare named Daisy who was patient with his inexperience, books that Eleanor sent from Kansas City, and most importantly, stability. The security of knowing he was home. One evening, about 2 months after Victor's departure, Caleb found Nora on the porch looking at a letter. News? He asked. From Eleanor. She wants to visit next month. Bring some of Eli's cousins to meet him. How do you feel about that? Good, I think. Nervous? But good. She folded the letter. She's talking about Christmas. Wants to know if we'd come to Kansas City or if she should come here. What do you want? I want to stay here. This is home. But I want Eli to know his father's family, too. Is that contradictory? No, it's smart. Caleb sat beside her. We'll figure it out. We always do. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm happy. Is that allowed? After everything that happened, after all the fear and fighting, am I allowed to just be happy? I think that's the whole point. What is? Surviving the bad stuff so you can appreciate the good. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the prairie in shades of orange and gold. From inside came the sound of Eli playing, talking to himself in different voices, acting out some adventure only he could see. Caleb? I'm pregnant. He went very still. What? I'm pregnant. About 2 months, I think. I wasn't sure at first, but now... She turned to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Are you angry? Angry? Why would I be... He stopped, realization dawning. Nora, this is...
This is incredible. We're having a baby. We're having a baby. He kissed her, hard and sudden, then pulled back. Sorry, should I not? Is that safe? She laughed. I'm pregnant, not made of glass. Right, right. He stood, sat back down, stood again. We need to. There's so much to. The house needs. Caleb. What? Breathe. He took a breath, then another. A baby. A baby. Our baby. Yes. He sat back down, pulling her against him. I thought I'd never get to do this again. Be a father. After Emma. His voice cracked. I thought that part of my life was over. It's not over. It's starting again.
That night, lying in bed with Nora curled against his side, Caleb stared at the ceiling and thought about the strange path his life had taken. 5 years ago, he'd been certain he'd spend the rest of his days alone, that he'd work himself to death on this ranch and be buried in the prairie without anyone to mourn him. Now he had a wife he loved, a son who called him Papa, and another child on the way. Life, he reflected, had a funny way of giving you what you needed exactly when you'd stopped looking for it. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Nora continued working until Caleb finally put his foot down and insisted she rest more. She argued, of course, but he could see she was tired in ways that worried him. The doctor said everything's fine, she insisted. The doctor also said you need to take it easy. I am taking it easy. You were hauling water this morning. That's easy. Nora. Fine. I'll rest, but I'm going to be bored out of my mind. Read a book, knit something, whatever pregnant women do. Such expertise you have. He grinned. I try. Eleanor visited in October, bringing gifts and stories of Kansas City. She doted on Eli, who'd warmed to her surprisingly quickly, and when Nora told her about the baby, the older woman's eyes filled with tears. Samuel would be so happy for you, Eleanor said, for both of you. I think he would be too, Nora agreed. That night, after Eleanor had gone to bed in the guest room they'd prepared, Caleb found Nora in the nursery they were setting up. You okay? He asked. Just thinking about Samuel, about how different my life might have been if he'd lived. Caleb felt a familiar twist of jealousy and guilt. Do you wish? No. She cut him off firmly. I loved Samuel. I'll always love him. But what we had was different from what you and I have. With Samuel, I was grateful, safe. With you, I'm alive. Both things mattered. Both things were real. Does that make sense? Yeah, it does. She touched the cradle Caleb had built, simple but sturdy, sanded smooth so no splinters could harm tiny hands. This is beautiful. It's nothing fancy. It's perfect. She looked at him. You're going to be a wonderful father. You already are with Eli. He makes it easy. No, you make it look easy. But I see how hard you work at it, how you pay attention to what he needs, what he's feeling, how you push him to be brave, but never push too hard. Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he just pulled her close. They stood there in the half-finished nursery, holding each other, and Caleb felt something settle in his chest, a peace he hadn't known in years. Winter came cold and hard. The ranch hands moved into the bunkhouse full-time, and the work became about survival, keeping the cattle fed, the water from freezing, the buildings intact against brutal winds. Nora grew round and uncomfortable, complaining about her back and her feet, and how none of her clothes fit anymore. Caleb found her beautiful in ways he couldn't articulate, and told her so often enough that she started throwing things at him. You're just saying that, she'd grumble. I'm not. I'm huge. You're pregnant. Same thing. Not even close. Eli was fascinated by his mother's changing body, asking endless questions about where babies came from and how they got out, and whether the new baby would like horses as much as he did. I don't know, kid, Caleb said one afternoon while they were checking fence line. Babies are pretty small. Might be a while before this one can ride. Then I'll teach them, like you taught me. Yeah? Yeah. I'll be the best big brother ever. Caleb's throat went tight. I believe you will be. The baby came in late February during a snowstorm that made getting to town impossible. The doctor couldn't reach them, so Caleb delivered his daughter himself with Eleanor talking him through it and Nora cursing him in ways that would have made his ranch hands blush. When it was over, when the baby was crying and Nora was crying and Caleb was pretty sure he'd aged 10 years in 3 hours, he held his daughter for the first time and felt his heart break open all over again. She was tiny, perfect, with a shock of dark hair in her mother's eyes and lungs that suggested she'd have no trouble making herself heard. "What do we name her?" Nora asked, exhausted but smiling. Caleb looked at his wife, at the baby in his arms, at Eli peeking through the doorway with wide eyes. "Hope," he said. "Her name is Hope." "Hope Mercer," Nora repeated. "I like it." "Me too," Eli announced, climbing onto the bed to get a better look. "Hi, Hope. I'm your big brother." The baby, unimpressed, continued screaming. The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Hope was not an easy baby. She cried often, slept poorly, and demanded constant attention, but she was theirs, and that made every sleepless night worth it. Eli took his role as big brother seriously, always wanting to help, to hold her, to show her things she was far too young to understand. Nora recovered slowly, frustrated by her body's limitations, but grateful for a husband who took night feedings and changed diapers without complaint. And Caleb discovered that being a father for the second time was both harder and easier than the first. Harder because he knew now how fragile life was, how quickly it could be taken. Easier because he knew how to be present, how to cherish the small moments, how to love without reservation. One spring evening, when Hope was about 3 months old, Caleb stood on the porch watching Eli play in the yard. The boy was chasing chickens, laughing when they squawked and flapped away. Inside, Nora was singing to Hope, the same melody she'd sung that first night. Tommy walked by, heading to the bunkhouse, and paused. "You look happy, boss." "I am happy." "Good. You deserve it. You both do." Tommy hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you ever think about how different things would be if Mrs. Mercer hadn't shown up that day?" Caleb thought about the lonely man he'd been, the empty house, the walls he'd built. All the time. And I'm grateful every single day that she collapsed on my porch instead of someone else's. Tommy grinned. "That's real romantic, boss. Get out of here." The kid laughed and headed to the bunkhouse, and Caleb went back to watching his son play while his daughter's cries quieted inside and his wife's voice carried on the evening air. He thought about Victor, wondered briefly if the man ever regretted his choices. Probably not. Men like Victor rarely did, but it didn't matter anymore. Victor was gone, his threats empty, his power broken. The court had ruled. Eleanor had intervened. And most importantly, Eli knew where he belonged. Nora appeared in the doorway, Hope settled in her arms, and finally, miraculously, asleep. "She's down," Nora whispered. "Thank the heavens. Don't jinx it." She moved to stand beside him, and they watched Eli together. "He's getting so big. Kids do that." "Smartass," he grinned. "You love it." "Unfortunately, I do." They stood there as the sun set, painting the prairie in familiar shades of gold and orange. Eli finally wore himself out and came trudging up to the porch, grass-stained and grinning. "Mama, did you see me? I almost caught one." "I saw. Very impressive." "Can I hold Hope?" "If you sit very carefully." They went inside and Caleb stayed on the porch a moment longer. He looked out over his land, not much by some standards, but his, earned through sweat and sacrifice and stubborn refusal to give up. Beyond the ranch, the prairie stretched endless and wild, the same prairie where a desperate woman had staggered carrying her dying child, where everything had changed on a single afternoon when compassion had won out over self-preservation. He'd saved them that day, Nora always said, but the truth was more complicated. They'd saved each other, 3 broken people who'd found a way to fit together despite impossible odds. Inside, Eli was talking to Hope in an exaggerated whisper, telling her about chickens and horses and all the things she'd learned when she was bigger. Nora laughed softly, and Caleb heard pure joy in the sound. He'd lost everything once, spent years certain he'd never recover. But life had other plans. It gave him a second chance in the form of a starving widow and her fevered son. It gave him the courage to risk his heart again. And it gave him this, a family built not on blood or obligation, but on choice, on showing up every day and choosing each other despite the fear. Caleb Mercer had spent 5 years hiding from life.
Now, he was finally ready to live it. The years had a way of smoothing rough edges, but they never erased them completely. Hope turned 1, then 2, then 3. Eli grew from a small boy into a gangly kid who could rope calves and read better than most adults. The ranch prospered, not wealthy by city standards, but solid, profitable, theirs. And Caleb learned that happiness wasn't a destination you reached and stayed at forever. It was something you had to choose over and over, even on the days when choosing it felt impossible. Like the morning he found Nora crying in the kitchen, Hope playing obliviously at her feet. "What's wrong?" he asked, alarm shooting through him. She held up a letter. "It's from Kansas City. Eleanor passed away. Peacefully, in her sleep. But she's gone." Caleb sat down heavily. Eleanor had visited just 2 months ago, bringing gifts and stories, and the kind of steady presence that had become a fixture in their lives. She'd seemed fine, healthy. But death didn't always announce itself. "I'm sorry," he said. "She left us something. The house wants us to come for the reading of the will." "Do we have to go?" "I think we should. For Eli's sake. She was his grandmother, even if he didn't know her long." So they went, all 4 of them, leaving Tommy in charge of the ranch. Kansas City was bigger and noisier than Caleb remembered, full of people rushing and buildings that blocked out the sky. The lawyer's office was mahogany and leather, the kind of place that made Caleb acutely aware of his calloused hands and sun-weathered face. But when they entered, the lawyer, a man named Morrison, greeted them warmly. "Mrs. Mercer, Mr. Mercer, and these must be the children Eleanor spoke of so fondly." The will was straightforward. Eleanor had left the bulk of her estate to charity, with provisions for various family members. To Victor, she'd left a token amount and a letter that Morrison handed over sealed. To Eli, she'd established a trust for education that would become available when he turned 18. And to Nora and Caleb, she'd left the Kansas City house and a sum of money substantial enough to make Caleb's head spin. "She wanted you to have options," Morrison explained. "The house can be sold if you prefer. The funds are yours to use as you see fit. Mrs. Whitaker was quite clear that you'd earned her trust and respect." After the meeting, they walked the city streets in a daze. Eli wanted to see everything. Hope wanted to be carried, and Caleb felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "We could stay," Nora said quietly that night after the children were asleep. "Use the house. Live here. Give the kids opportunities." "Do you want to?" She was quiet for a long time. "Part of me does. The part that remembers being poor, being desperate. The part that wants to give our children everything I never had. And the other part? Remembers that the ranch is home, that we built something there, that money and houses don't matter as much as..." She trailed off. "As what?" "As being where you belong." They decided to sell the house and keep the money as security, for emergencies, for the children's futures, for the inevitable disasters that came with ranch life. It felt right. Practical, without being cold. But Victor appeared at the hotel the night before they were scheduled to leave. Caleb opened the door to find him standing there, older and harder than before. His expensive suit couldn't hide the signs of a difficult few years, lines around his eyes, gray in his hair, a tightness to his mouth. "I don't want trouble," Victor said immediately. "I just want to talk." "Then talk." "Can I come in?" Caleb didn't move. "Nora's putting the kids to bed. You can say whatever you need to say from right there." Victor's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I read my mother's letter, the one she left me." "And?" "And she told me exactly what she thought of me. Every failure, every mistake, every selfish choice. She didn't hold back." He laughed bitterly. "Even in death, she couldn't resist a final condemnation." "Sounds like she knew you well." "She did. Better than I wanted to admit." Victor looked past Caleb into the room. "Is Eli here? I'd like to see him." "No. I'm his uncle." "You're the man who tried to take him away from his mother for money. That doesn't make you family." "I know what I did was wrong." "Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you only care now that you've got nothing left to gain." Victor flinched. "You're right. I was desperate. In debt so deep I couldn't see daylight. I thought if I could just control Eli's trust, I could pay off my creditors, start over. I told myself I was doing it for him, that I could give him a better life. But that was a lie." "Glad you figured that out." "I'm trying to apologize." "Then apologize. But don't expect forgiveness."
You scared that boy. You made his mother think she might lose him. You hired people to sabotage our ranch. An apology doesn't erase that. I know. Victor's shoulders slumped. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that my mother was right about me, and that seeing what you've built, the family, the life, it makes me realize what I could have had if I'd made different choices. It's not too late to make different choices now, isn't it? I'm 43 years old, bankrupt, and alone. Everyone who ever cared about me is either dead or done with me. Caleb felt an unexpected stirring of sympathy, quickly suppressed. That's on you to fix, not us. I know. Victor turned to go, then paused. Tell Nora I'm sorry, truly. She deserved better from this family. He walked away, and Caleb watched until he disappeared around a corner. When he closed the door, Nora was standing in the bedroom doorway. How much did you hear? He asked. Enough. She moved to stand beside him. Do you think he meant it? Probably. Doesn't change what he did. No, but maybe people can change if they want to badly enough. You're more forgiving than I am. Not forgiving, just realistic. We all make mistakes. Some are worse than others, but we all stumble. She took his hand. You made mistakes before you met me. I made them too. Victor's were bigger and meaner, but they came from the same place, fear and desperation. You defending him? No, just saying that being bitter doesn't serve us. He's gone. We won. We get to go home to our ranch and our life, and he gets to live with his choices. That's enough. Caleb pulled her close. When did you get so wise? I married a rancher who taught me that holding grudges is like carrying rocks. It just weighs you down. I never said that. No, but you live it. You could have hated me and Eli for disrupting your life. Instead, you made room for us. That's wisdom, too. They went home the next day, and Caleb had never been so happy to see the prairie. The endless sky, the familiar rutted road, the ranch house weathered but standing. Tommy met them at the door, grinning. How was the big city? Loud, Eli announced, and they don't have horses anywhere. Tragic. How will they survive? The kids ran inside, and Tommy helped unload the wagon. When Caleb told him about the inheritance, the kid whistled low. You gonna expand? Buy more land? Maybe. Haven't decided yet. Right now, I'm just glad to be home. Boss, can I tell you something? Sure. When you first hired me, I thought you were the meanest son of a bitch I'd ever met. Didn't talk, didn't smile. Worked like you were trying to punish yourself for something. Caleb raised an eyebrow. And now? Now you're still mean, but at least you smile sometimes. And you've got a family. Makes you seem human. Thanks, I think. Tommy laughed and headed to the bunkhouse, and Caleb stood in his yard looking at his home. 5 years since that afternoon when everything changed. 5 years of work and worry and learning how to be part of something again. Inside, Hope was demanding a story, and Eli was arguing about which book. Nora was negotiating peace with the patience of a saint. It was chaos and noise and everything Caleb had thought he didn't want. He wouldn't trade it for anything. The seasons turned. Summer heat gave way to autumn cool, then winter cold, then spring mud. The ranch thrived. They hired another hand, built a new barn, expanded the herd. Eli turned 7 and started showing real skill with horses. Hope was 4 and fearless, climbing everything and asking questions that had no good answers. And Caleb discovered that being happy didn't mean forgetting the past. Emma and Sarah were still there in his heart, not as painful wounds anymore, but as gentle memories. He could think about them without breaking, could tell his children about the sister they'd never meet and the woman who'd first taught him how to love. Does it make you sad? Eli asked one evening when Caleb had been telling stories, talking about them. Sometimes, but mostly it makes me grateful. For what? For having loved them, for the time we had, and for having a second chance with your mama and you and Hope. Mama says you were sad for a long time before we came. I was. Are you still sad? Caleb looked at the boy, 7 years old now, but wise beyond his years. Sometimes. But mostly I'm happy. And that's a gift I didn't think I'd get again. Eli nodded solemnly. I'm glad we found you. Me too, kid. Me too. But life had one more test in store, and it came on a Tuesday in late May when Eli was 8 and Hope was 5. Caleb was working in the barn when he heard screaming. He ran outside to find Nora standing by the corral, her face white, pointing at something Caleb couldn't see. He vaulted the fence and his heart stopped. Eli was on the ground, unconscious, blood seeping from a gash on his head. Hope stood nearby, crying. And the young stallion they'd been training was rearing, eyes wild, clearly spooked. Caleb got to Eli in seconds, checking for breathing, for a pulse. Both there. Thank everything. But the boy didn't respond when Caleb called his name, and the blood was coming too fast. "Tommy, get the wagon! We need the doctor now!" The ride to town was the longest of Caleb's life. Nora held Eli in her lap, pressing cloth to the wound, whispering prayers she probably didn't believe in but said anyway, because what else could you do when your child was hurt? Hope clung to Caleb, crying. "I told him not to go in. I told him the horse was scared, but he wanted to show you he could handle it." "It's not your fault, sweetheart. It's nobody's fault." But Caleb couldn't shake the thought that it was his fault. He'd been teaching Eli about horses, pushing him to be brave, to trust his instincts. Had he pushed too hard? Expected too much from an 8-year-old? The doctor took one look and called for his surgical kit. "He's got a concussion at minimum, possibly a fracture. I need to examine him properly." They waited in the outer room while the doctor worked. Nora paced, her hands twisted together. Hope had cried herself to sleep in Caleb's lap, and Caleb sat frozen, remembering another time when a child's life hung in balance and he'd been powerless to help. "Please," he thought, "not again. I can't survive not again." After what felt like hours, the doctor emerged. "He's stable. The wound needed stitches, and he's got a bad concussion, but no skull fracture. He'll need to rest for a few weeks, no excitement, no rough play, but he should recover fully." The relief was so intense Caleb's vision blurred. They took Eli home and set up a bed downstairs so Nora could watch him constantly. The boy woke up confused and in pain but alive, so wonderfully alive. "Papa?" he mumbled. "Did I do it wrong?" "No, kid. You didn't do anything wrong." "But I fell off." "Everybody falls off sometimes. The trick is getting back on." "I don't want to get back on. I was scared." And there it was, the fear Caleb had been trying to prevent, now planted anyway. "That's okay. Being scared is okay. You said brave people aren't scared. I was wrong. Brave people are scared. They just don't let the fear stop them forever." Caleb took the boy's hand carefully, mindful of injuries. "But you don't have to get back on today, or tomorrow, or even next week. You heal first. And when you're ready, if you're ready, we'll try again. And if you decide horses aren't for you, that's okay too." "Really? Really? I don't need you to be a rancher, Eli. I just need you to be you, healthy and safe and happy." The boy's eyes filled with tears. "I thought you'd be disappointed." "Never. You hear me? I could never be disappointed in you." Eli fell asleep holding Caleb's hand, and Caleb stayed there long after, watching his son breathe and making silent promises about being more careful, more protective, more aware. That night, when Eli was finally resting peacefully and Hope was asleep, Caleb found Nora on the porch. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For pushing him too hard. For making him think he had to prove something. Caleb, you didn't make him do anything. He's 8 years old and wanted to impress his father. That's normal." "I should have been watching closer." "You can't watch every second. Accidents happen." She turned to face him. "Do you remember what you told me that first night, when I blamed myself for Eli getting sick? I told you that you did what you had to do to survive. You told me that asking for help wasn't weakness, that doing my best was enough even when it didn't feel like enough." She took his hands. "The same applies to you. You're a good father. Today was scary, but Eli's okay, and beating yourself up doesn't change anything except making you miserable. I keep thinking about Emma, about how I couldn't save her. But you saved Eli, today, and that first day when we showed up here. You've saved him over and over just by being present and loving him. That counts for something." Caleb pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "Lucky for you, you don't have to find out." Eli recovered slowly but completely. He was tentative around horses for months afterward, but with patient encouragement from Caleb, he eventually got back in the saddle. Not because he had to, but because he decided he wanted to. And that decision, made from a place of courage rather than expectation, meant everything. The years continued their steady march.
Eli turned 10, then 12, then 14. He grew tall and rangy, with Caleb's work ethic and Nora's thoughtful nature. Hope turned 7, then 9, then 11. She was wild and bright, with a laugh that could light up the darkest days.
They added on to the house, built a proper schoolroom where both children learned their letters and numbers from books Eleanor's trust fund provided, hired a tutor who came twice a week from town, teaching them things Caleb and Nora couldn't. The ranch prospered. They bought adjacent land when it became available, expanded the operation, hired more hands. Caleb was 40 now, his hair showing gray, his body showing the wear of hard years. But he was happy. Deeply, contentedly happy in ways his younger self would never have believed possible. One evening in late summer when Eli was 15 and Hope was 12, the family sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become a tradition, ending each day together, talking about nothing and everything. "Papa," Eli said, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you ever regret it? Letting us stay that first day?" Caleb looked at his son, 15 now, nearly a man, but still the same kid who'd looked at him with trust when there was no reason to trust anyone. "Not once," he said honestly. "Best decision I ever made." Even though it was hard, even with all the trouble with Uncle Victor and the gossip and everything, especially because of all that, the hard things are what make the good things matter. Caleb looked at Nora, who was braiding Hope's hair, then back at Eli. "I spent 5 years trying to avoid pain. Thought if I didn't feel anything, I couldn't get hurt. But I was wrong. You can't selectively numb yourself. You block out the bad. You block out the good, too." "So what changed?" "Your mama collapsed on my porch carrying you, and I had a choice. Stay safe and closed off, or take a risk. I took the risk. And yeah, it was hard sometimes, scary sometimes, but it was also real. And real is better than safe." Hope piped up. "Mama says you were grumpy when they first got here." "I was very grumpy," Caleb admitted, "but you're not grumpy anymore." "That's because you kids won't let me be. You're too loud and chaotic," Hope giggled. "You love it." "Unfortunately, I do." Nora smiled at him over Hope's head, and Caleb felt that familiar warmth in his chest. 20 years from now, he thought, they'd still be here. Older, grayer, probably creakier, but together. And that was enough. "Tell us about when Mama first got here," Hope demanded, "about how she fell down and you had to carry her. You've heard that story 100 times. Tell it again." So Caleb told it again, about the hot afternoon when he'd seen a figure staggering up the road, about the desperate woman and her dying son, about the decision to help that had changed everything. He told it the way he always did, with Nora adding details he forgot and the kids asking questions they already knew the answers to. It was their story, their origin, the day when 3 broken people had found each other and decided to try being whole together. Later, after the kids had gone to bed, Caleb and Nora stayed on the porch. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked. "If I'd collapsed at a different ranch, or if you'd turned us away?" "All the time." And I'm grateful for every choice that led us here, even the painful ones, even the mistakes." He took her hand. "You know what I've learned?" "What?" "That there's no such thing as a perfect life. People who chase perfect end up miserable because perfect doesn't exist. But there is such a thing as a good life, a real life, built by people who show up and try and forgive each other when they screw up. That's very philosophical for a rancher." "I have my moments." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Caleb Mercer." "I love you too, Nora Mercer." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. The prairie stretched out around them, vast and wild and familiar. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Closer, the cattle lowed softly. From inside the house came the faint sounds of children settling down for the night. This was home, not the building or the land, though those mattered, but the people. The life they'd built together from desperation and determination, and the simple choice to keep trying even when it would have been easier to give up. Caleb had lost everything once, buried his heart so deep he'd thought it was dead. Then a woman and a boy had walked into his life and forced him to feel again, to hope again, to To believe that second chances weren't just stories but real possibilities if you were brave enough to reach for them. And now, 15 years later, he could look back and see the truth clearly. He hadn't saved them that day. They'd saved each other. Three people who'd needed family and found it in the most unlikely place, on a dusty ranch in the middle of nowhere, built on honesty instead of illusion. "What are you thinking about?" Nora asked. "How lucky I am." "Luck had nothing to do with it. You worked for this. We both did." "Maybe, but I'm still grateful." "Me too." The years ahead would bring their own challenges. Children would grow and leave, though they'd always come back. The ranch would face droughts and storms and economic downturns. Bodies would age and fail in the way bodies do. Life would be life, messy and hard and beautiful and real. But they'd face it together. That's what family meant. Not perfection, but presence. Not avoiding pain, but walking through it side by side. Not guarantees, but promises to keep showing up even when it was difficult. Caleb stood, offering his hand to Nora. "Come on, let's go to bed." Romantic as always. "You knew what you were getting into when you married me." "I really didn't, but I figured it out along the way." They went inside, checked on the children one last time, and climbed the stairs to the bedroom they'd shared for 15 years. The same room where hope had been born, where they'd laughed and fought and made up and built a life one day at a time. As Caleb drifted off to sleep, Nora's breathing steady beside him, he thought about the man he'd been 15 years ago, closed off, bitter, convinced that safety meant solitude. That man was gone. In his place was someone who'd learned that the opposite of loneliness wasn't just company, it was connection. Real, messy, complicated connection with people who saw your flaws and chose to stay anyway. He'd learned that love wasn't a feeling you fell into and stayed in effortlessly. It was a choice you made every single day, in 1,000 small ways. Choosing patience when you wanted to yell, choosing forgiveness when you wanted to hold a grudge, choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. He'd learned that family wasn't just blood or legal documents. It was the people who showed up, who saw you at your worst and didn't run, who built a life with you one decision at a time, even when those decisions were hard. And he'd learned that second chances weren't about forgetting the past. They were about carrying it with you, the pain and the joy both, and using those lessons to build something better. The woman who'd collapsed on his porch 15 years ago had been desperate, starving, and hopeless. Now she slept beside him, strong, confident, loved. The boy who'd been dying had grown into a young man who was brave and kind and everything a father could hope for, and the daughter they'd created together was proof that life didn't end after tragedy. It just changed shape. Tomorrow would bring work, fences to mend, cattle to move, 100 small tasks that made up ranch life. But there would also be breakfast together, Eli's terrible jokes, Hope's questions, Nora's smile. The small moments that mattered more than the grand gestures. This was the life Caleb Mercer had built. Not perfect, not easy, but real and earned and his. And when he finally slipped into sleep, it was with a smile on his face and gratitude in his heart. Because sometimes the best things in life come from the worst moments. Sometimes falling apart is the beginning of coming together. And sometimes the family you choose means more than the one you were born into. Sometimes a woman collapses on your porch and changes everything. And if you're smart, if you're brave, if you're willing to risk your heart one more time, you let her,